Okay, hello everyone. We're doing another stream, and we're doing a stream on demons because an investigation of Capturing Christianity's homepage, and in fact, I might show you that now, reveals a very puzzling and concerning problem, and that is that we're being invaded by demons, or at least we are on YouTube. We can see from Cameron's latest videos. We've got demons, more demons, more demons, more possession, more demons, demons, demons. And then we've got. Actually, I don't know if that one's about demons or not, but it looks weird. Demons there, although I've already talked about that one. Aliens, demons, skulls, possession. Actually, why does God allow possessions? I don't think I've watched that one. Let's have a look at that. Demons. And these are just the videos. If we go to lives, we've also got demons, aliens and demons. What a combo. Aliens and demons again. Demons. 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 It's quite impressive, really, the sheer amount of material that is being spewed forth, one should say, or perhaps emanating from the underworld, something like that's happening. It's concerning, and something needs to be done about it. So I am presenting myself as tribute. I'm going to put a mark in the line. What do they say? Put down a line, no further, this far and no further. And we're going to fight the good fight and defend our world against the demon onslaught. I've accidentally clicked on his oldest videos, and I'm kind of looking at where the channel began. Look at what he used to do. I haven't even watched some of these old videos. They used to all be discussions. I guess this is under live, but like even for the live stuff, there was like a discussion between people about an actual issue. Street epistemology, fine-tuning. I think I remember this one. Moral argument, traditionalism versus annihilationism. And then we compare that to his latest videos. This is on the live channel. Fake shroud, is God a delusion? Demons rule our prisons. Crime points to Jesus, aliens and demons. This one's that's a legit one. But then this is the one he was complaining about that no one was watching. The fine-tuning live call-in. Aliens and demons. This is what I mean when I say the channel's gone downhill. Like if you just compare the old videos from the newest ones, I think I don't want to say the channel was ever amazing, but it wasn't always like this. Like there used to be actual arguments and discussion, and not just like sensationalism and demons and culture war stuff. Anyway, that's a bit of a distraction. So we've got quite a few videos to have a look at, and I don't know how many of them we're going to get through because it really is a deluge, and no one man can stop this onrushing torrent. But we'll see how we go, and I'll probably skip around a little bit and play it on fast speed so I can keep what shreds are left of my sanity. So forgive me for that. But anyway, let's start with. Will it automatically go? No, it just kills it if I do that. Okay, it looks like I'm going to have to manually pick each of the tabs. Okay. The shocking reason God allows demonic possession. This is a bit of an older one, but it's a question I've had actually as to what kind of function demonic possession fulfills in God's plan and how that's sort of explained by theism, because it's not really obvious to me at all why demonic possession is something that would be expected under theism. So this is a short one. Let's have a listen. Let me just pop it on 1.5 and then we'll give it a listen here.
Like, why doesn't Jesus just prevent this from happening? You've got to invite this spirit. You've got to invite it in somehow. It's not as if you're just like walking down the street one day and then you just, oh, now I've got a demon. So maybe it's a case of like Jesus is respecting the free will of the person to like actively go and do that on their own, for free will, their volition. Yep. Is that how you would view these things?
The mystery of evil, of why it's allowed by God. Number one, it's what you identified as free will. So he loves us and he wants to give us a chance to be kind to our neighbor, love God, and make our way back to God, right? he wants us to have that opportunity. In order to have that opportunity, he doesn't want blind robots that can't do anything else, like the plant that can only grow towards the sun, and that's all it knows, and that's all it can do. It can't choose anything else. He wants us to exercise our rational mind and choose him, and also reject the evil. And evil is cruelty to neighbor, exploitation of others, harming others, getting ahead at other people's expense, that type of thing. And then, of course, worse evil, just destructive evil. So he wants us to grow and learn. Like if you think of bad things you did when you were younger, like we've all done bad things when we were younger. We've probably done.
It would be interesting to have a defense of why this. There's different notions of free will, of course. The notion of free will is often contrasted in these types of discussions with just being a robot, but it's not obvious that that is sort of the relevant contrast here, like a pure automaton that has sort of no agency at all, because there's a difference between having libertarian free will and having a kind of compatibilist free will. A plant's an interesting example because plants, as far as I'm aware, they're responsive to stimuli, but there's no mind. There's no rational consideration of reasons for and against something. There's no choice in any sense, right? Whereas everyone agrees that humans make choices, even if you don't believe in free will. So that's not really... the question is not whether humans make choices or are responsive to reasons or engage in rational deliberation. And so it seems like if you think that that is what is morally valuable, it might be irrelevant as to whether that constitutes free will or like libertarian agency or something. So the point that I'm making here is what you need to establish is that the strong kind of free will that I guess Cameron and apologists typically defend, you need to establish that itself is what is morally valuable, or that why God would have moral reasons to want that to exist. Because if that doesn't exist, it doesn't follow that everyone's just a robot, a pure automaton, because they could still make choices, right? It's just that they wouldn't be free choices in this strong sense. You need to show that that wouldn't be sufficient. A sort of determined choice wouldn't be sufficient. It has to literally be sort of this de novo self-generated choice. And I think that's characteristic of libertarian agency. I think that's quite difficult to defend. I've not really seen it defended. It's just sort of assumed. And I think that that's quite an issue here, because if you're going to ground all of these, or if you're going to justify all of these all of these bad things on the basis of these are necessary byproducts of God allowing us choice, you have to establish why it's so important that God gives us not just choice, that God gives us free agency, like free will. Would it not be sufficient for God to simply allow us to create us in a way that we can choose, but perhaps in a causally determined way, like I guess like the Calvinists think, right? And there's other options there as well. I'm just emphasizing that what we don't have, it's a false contrast to say that we have either radical libertarian freedom on the one hand and like pure automaton plant growing towards the sun on the other hand, and there's sort of no morally relevant differences in the middle. I think that that's very implausible, and what the apologist needs in order for this kind of free will defense to go forward, well, they need many things, but one thing they need is to establish why this kind of very strong sense of free will is itself morally worthwhile. Why is it significant? Why is it so important that it's worth all of these negative outcomes to bring about? And that's just never really defended. So I don't really regard this as very satisfactory as a response when we're not really going to even try to defend the notion, but why is this specific type of freedom that valuable? Even then, if you put all of that aside, there's a major problem here. Well, actually, maybe I'm preempting a bit too much, because God can still give us libertarian agency, and even after he's done that, he still faces a further set of choices as to what environment he puts us in. So for example, God could give us the choice that every human being is born with like a button, I don't know, embedded in their palm or something. You press this button and every other human in existence dies in excruciating death, right? Now, that would be a type of freedom, right? It would give us the freedom to make that choice or not to make that choice, right? But the question is, why would he do that? Why would he want us to have that degree of control or potential power over other people? Is that not a bit much, or maybe not, right? Maybe he needs us to have that level of potential extreme consequence in order for our freedom to be fully actualized or something. I don't know. Okay, well, maybe that's too high. Maybe the button only kills 10 people or like one person. Or is it 1 million people? Like, where does it need to be? Now, humans don't have a button that we can press, but the point I'm making is that humans have certain causal powers and capabilities. If you were designing, imagine you're like a computer game designer. You could design humans to have a whole range of different powers and capabilities with respect to other people, like how easy it is to hurt or harm or help other people, and what is the scope of consequences you can have on reality and on other people, animals, and so forth on the future. God has chosen a particular set of, I guess, parameters, if you want to think of it that way, that humans have this amount of capability to do harms to other people. He could have easily made it more or less. Like, imagine that we had telepathy. That would change things radically. Imagine that our bodies were sturdier, so it was harder to physically harm people, or we were emotionally more resilient, so it was harder to mentally harm people. There's all sorts of things that could be different, right? What if famines were much harder to bring about because humans could photosynthesize or something? Then over history, many fewer people would have died from famine and things like that, right? So why do we have this particular set of powers and capabilities to harm other people? That's a decision that God has made, and what you have to argue is that this is somehow expected, or like that there's reasons for this, that God has, that there's some justification for this particular set of parameters of causal capabilities with respect to other beings. And the reason that's important is because you could still argue, yes, it's very important that we have libertarian free agency, but why did God give us these set of capabilities? Why couldn't he give us a lessened ability to harm other people? Yes, still some ability. Let's say we need some ability to harm other people in order to exercise that free agency. But why this amount? Why this much? Why can we harm people this much? And that's still an open question, even if you assume that libertarian agency is extremely important. And as I've said, it's not obvious we should assume that. But even if you do, there's still this further question. Now, this is relevant to the question of demons, because we already have many abilities to harm other people and to help other people without bringing demons into the picture. So why is it that when God's sitting back in his armchair and thinking, how should I set up this reality that I'm creating? Why does he think that it's important for our agency to add demons to the picture? How does that enhance our agency? It seems to only make things worse. Like, demons don't seem to do anything good. They only make things worse. So why is it that reality is improved by adding demons? It seems like the implication of this is that our free will wasn't sufficient. We weren't able to sufficiently exercise our powers and capabilities and whatever else without demons. But adding demons into the mix kind of bumps up the free will multiplier or whatever, and allows it to be sort of sufficient for us to exercise free will. This is kind of implied by the claim that's being made here. Our freedom is increased by adding the ability to sort of, open ourselves up to demons, like whatever that means exactly. And this is, I think, a very dubious claim, because it sort of implies, well, why not make demons even more powerful? Or why not make it easier for us to be susceptible? Or why not give us this button we can press that just kills everyone horribly, right? Like, what is the right amount of negative consequences that we're able to bring about as people? And why is it that, is the amount that we actually do see really what we would expect? It seems to be entirely post hoc rationalization. Well, the Bible talks about demons, and we have these claims of demons. So obviously God has to have a reason for allowing them to exist. What must that reason be? Oh, I guess it helps us to exercise our free will. Right? There's no actual principled reason as to why it was that without demons, we didn't quite have enough ability to choose to do evil. But with the demons, yeah, it's just about right. God stuck his pinky in the mixture when he was making things. He's like, not quite enough ability to harm others and have negative consequences. Let's sprinkle in a bit of demons. That's just what the mixture needs, right? Like that's kind of what we're expected to believe, apparently. And I just think that's entirely ad hoc and absurd. Like, there's just no justification for that at all. I realize this was a short video and I've already gone on a long tangent, but it's not really a tangent. Like, the fundamental logic here is making a presupposition that's completely unjustified. Like, why do we need demons to enhance our free will? Why isn't it enough without that? And then if demons help, then why not more? Why not make it easier or give them more powers or whatever? It's just whatever we happen to see, that's exactly what we'd expect. Oh, that's what theism predicts. This is why theism is such a poor explanation. It's because it's so ad hoc and you can account for anything.
Bad things yesterday or last week, but worse when we were younger. Okay. The reason most likely that we're doing better now is because we've learned from our mistakes. We fell, we messed up, we felt bad, we reflected on it, and then we changed. And that's what evil does, is it provides an opportunity for temptation so that we can get a corrective experience and realize, oh, being a selfish jerk isn't the way to go. It doesn't feel very good. It doesn't lead to good things in my life. It doesn't lead to good things with family and friends. So I'm going to change and try to be a better person. That's what evil does, is it gives us that clarity. By having the shadow there, we can see the value of the light, essentially. I'm not saying it's...
So does that mean that God needs the evil in order for him to see the value of the light? Because that's not typically how God is portrayed, right? God is portrayed as being essentially and necessarily good. So why couldn't he make people in his... I mean, we're supposed to be made in God's image, right? So why couldn't he make lesser beings, not with all of his power, but at least with his ability to discern the value, the benefits of being good, right? Like what's good about being good, without needing the dark there. Again, it's just sort of these bland assertions that appeals to sort of these sort of intuitive sounding, but when you think about them, not at all obvious ideas like, oh, well, obviously you have to go through hardship and face adversity and travails and temptations in order to grow. Well, obviously that sounds intuitive because that's true for human beings, right? But that's not the relevant question. The relevant question is what's expected under theism. And to answer that, you have to think about, well, if I had the freedom of God to design reality from scratch, what would I do? What would be expected? What's a reasonable inference from the postulates that have been made about, omnipotent and omnibenevolent and such? Well, why would you expect him to make a reality where things are really difficult and it's actually hard to know what right from wrong is? And and many people, don't know this intuitively or find it difficult to live up to. Why wouldn't he just make people better and have an innate knowledge of goodness, or at least make it easier to learn for us and stick to? Like, humans are generally not very good at doing the right thing. So why did God make it that way? I know people say, oh, well, it was the fall. But again, God set things up knowing that it would fall. So that doesn't really answer the question. It really reminds me of the idea that, if a parent puts toddlers in an environment in which it is easy for the toddlers to knock something off the shelf and smash a vase and cause injury to themselves and others, right? Even if they told the toddlers, hey, don't touch this thing, and the toddler understands and does it anyway, right? Because they're a toddler, right? Yeah, they may understand that it's wrong, but they may still do it. In some sense, it is the toddler's fault in the sense that, yes, they did wrong. They understood they weren't supposed to do this and they did it anyway. But it's also the parents' fault. And I say it's predominantly the parents' fault, because why did they put the vase there in the first place, or set up the kids near the vase? You don't set up the circumstances that allow that to happen. Even if you tell, they don't have to be told, they could be older children. The point is that there's a parental responsibility to set up the environment in a safe way. Yes, you don't want to remove all agency from children, but you want to limit the potential negative consequences of their actions. Apparently, God doesn't really care about that, so he doesn't want to limit the negative consequences of our actions as we grow. He wants to sort of amplify them by adding demons into the mix for some reason. Why does God want to do it this way? Why not just make us initially so that we have greater knowledge of right and wrong, and better ability to choose, like higher desire to, or greater sense of responsibility, or make people so that they're more conscientious, like whatever it is exactly that we're lacking. God could make us that way, presumably. He's God. So if he wants to make beings in his own image, why did he do such a crappy job and make us so bad that it's so difficult for us to do the right thing, and such that he then needs to add demons to make it even harder for us? None of this makes sense. Why is God making people so bad when he wants us to be so good? Oh, well, then we have to go through all these hardships and trials and evil for us to learn. But only because God made us that way, which doesn't make any sense. Why would he make us that way? Well, he wouldn't. So all of this is ad hoc and nonsensical.
It's a good, but God brings good out of it. So even in this extreme end with this demonic stuff that we're talking about, God is allowing it as a corrective, negative experience for the person that spiritually has walked up to the edge of the cliff and is teetering and is about to fall off.
Metaphors like that are not helpful. What does it mean that someone spiritually walked up to the edge of the cliff? What does that actually mean in practice? Like, can you give an example of what that would look like? Because some of the demonic experiences that I've heard, it's not at all obvious what the corollary of walking up to the edge of the cliff is. Like, apparently just like playing a Ouija board or something like that is like spiritually walking to the edge of the cliff. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, explain what this is supposed to mean.
And at the last moment, he allows them to fully see the reality of what they've chosen before they fall off that cliff. And so hopefully they will then reject the evil and run back to God and say, oh, I didn't understand. Please forgive me. I want to be with you.
But that's not really fair, right? In order for someone to appropriately consent to something, they need to have consent needs to be informed. So someone who makes a choice needs to have a proper understanding of the choices available and the consequences thereof, or the likely consequences thereof. They don't need to have a full understanding, but it needs to be kind of sufficient. So if God gives us commandments and asks us to do certain things, but then doesn't actually, or we're not actually able to properly understand the consequences of those different actions or different outcomes, it seems like God's being a bit unreasonable. It's like if you're a doctor and you're telling the patient you can choose this treatment or this other treatment, but they don't really explain the risks and the side effects and the downsides and costs and benefits and other things properly, then how is the patient supposed to make an appropriate choice? And then if the patient makes one choice and then later they don't comply with their treatment for various reasons, it's not really appropriate to blame the patient, or at least only partly. It seems that the physician who didn't explain the different outcomes properly is also substantively to blame there, because yes, the patient made a choice, but they didn't make an appropriately informed choice. And so if God is creating us and giving us commandments of how to live in life, but he's not providing us with an appropriate understanding of the reasons or for choosing different things or the potential outcomes, then isn't that on God? Shouldn't he give us more of an ability to properly understand the consequences of our actions? Again, it's like in any other context, when we're talking about giving people choices, we realize that there's responsibility on the person setting this situation up to restrict or limit the negative consequences of people misusing their choices. And second of all, that it's also incumbent on them to ensure that the people in that situation have appropriate information about the potential outcomes, consequences, and so forth of the different choices available to them, not just to let them go at it and hope they figure it out. And yet somehow these don't apply to God. Somehow we just forget about these issues that are very important when thinking about situations of freedom and responsibility. Again, it's just special pleading and vagaries of, oh, they're spiritually on the edge of a cliff, whatever that's supposed to mean. There's no substance there to any of these responses. It's just all appealing to vagueness and sort of platitudes that sound nice but don't actually make sense if you think about it rigorously.
To love others, I want to feel safe, all of that. And so the demon, in spite of itself, serves, because in the end, there's great spiritual conversion in people that are freed of this stuff. They have very fruitful spiritual lives from there on out as a rule, and they're running after God for the rest of their lives in a good way, not in a fearful way, but in a joyful way, and they're grateful for being freed.
Hello, Cam.
That's actually an empirical observation, right? That people who have been freed from demonic possession have sort of heightened spiritual awareness and greater devotion or something. That seems to be an empirical claim that could be tested. So I don't know if I suspect that's not true, but maybe it is. Anyway, okay, so the answer to why God allows demons is essentially that God did such a poor job creating humanity and the world in the first place that it turns out there wasn't quite enough ability for us to do harm to, I guess, ourselves and other people. So he needed to sprinkle in a bit of extra something. It is a little secret sauce, a splash of this in the mix, and that's demonic possession, which apparently was necessary. Okay, yeah, sure. That's a very convincing answer. Next up, we have... I wish I could share multiple tabs at once, but it seems like I can't do that without sharing everything, which I don't want to do. So next up we have, do exorcists ever doubt what they've seen? I hope the answer is yes, because you should, I mean, in general, be skeptical of lots of things, including your own experiences, because we are fallible.
An example of,
what's this coming up?
Despite what you've seen, do you ever doubt in demonic possession?
That's a great question, because, I'm trained to be a skeptic.
It is a good question.
I should be the last person to believe that anybody truly is possessed. So every other possible explanation.
Well, that's obviously not true, right? Because there are plenty of people who don't believe that anyone has been possessed. So you're obviously not the last person to believe that anyone is possessed, but anyway.
And needs to be looked at. Sometimes people will even pretend to be possessed, either as a way to make a mockery of the church, or maybe they are suffering from a mental illness and they believe that by acting possessed, it gives them some attention or notoriety that they're looking for. That's why, again, it's a very methodical process. Obviously, if somebody comes to me, I would agree that they're suffering, but I need to determine what is the cause of that suffering. And I can pray with them, pray over them, but it doesn't mean I'm doing an exorcism right away. But it's simply giving them some level of pastoral care that they need at that particular time. Then it allows me to assess the person where they are and then to determine how to move forward. And any exorcist will tell you that sometimes the devil will send people your way simply to trip you up or to kind of get you off, course, if you will, simply as a way of preventing me from helping the people who may truly need a good evaluation to make sure that I'm not being deceived, or that the church isn't just being ridiculed by somebody who does not believe that evil is a reality personified in what we call the devil.
If I can clarify, I think Joaquin might be asking, like, everything that you've seen, all the demonic cases that you've worked on, every exorcism that you've done, do you ever think back on those and doubt that those people were ever possessed, or that demon possession is even in general something that happens?
I've never doubted on any case that I worked with. And again, I think that's because the church says I need to arrive at.
Huh? What? Hang on. I think I've missed something here. Let's go back here. So the first thing that he says is,
Hey, Father Vince, despite what you've seen,
But he truly is possessed.
demonic possession.
That's a great question, because I'm trained to be a skeptic.
Does he ever
I
doubt
should be the
demonic
last person
possession?
to believe that anybody
okay, he says he's trained to be a skeptic
truly
and
is
he should be
possessed.
the last
So every
person
other
to believe
possible
that anyone is
explanation
possessed.
needs to be looked at. Sometimes people will even pretend to
Okay.
be.
So skeptic, last person to believe. Okay. Fast forward a little bit through some waffle.
Who does not believe that evil is a reality,
Uh,
if you will, simply as a way of preventing me
wait, where does he? Oh my
right
God.
away.
What is
But
this?
it's simply giving them
Huge amount.
some level of pastoral care that they need at that particular time. Then it allows me to assess the person where they are, and then to determine how to move forward.
just
And
not
any
this.
exorcist will tell you that sometimes the devil will send people your way simply to trip you up, or to kind of get you off, course, if you will, simply as a way of preventing me from helping the people who may truly need my help. So it is important to really give people a good evaluation to make sure
does
that
waffle, doesn't
I'm not being deceived, or that the church isn't just being ridiculed by somebody who does not believe that evil is a reality
he's saying
personified in
again,
what we
they
call
need
the
to
devil.
If I can clarify, I think Joaquin might.
So the first 2 minutes he's saying skeptical, doubt, got to check, rule out other possibilities.
Be asking, like, everything that you've seen, all the demonic cases that you've worked on, every exorcism that you've done, do you ever think back on those and doubt that those people were ever possessed, or that demon possession is even in general something that happens?
I've never doubted on any case that I worked with. And again, I think that's because the church says I need to arrive at moral certitude beyond a doubt.
What? And then he says he's never doubted on any case that he's worked on. But how can you be a skeptic and never, never doubt? Does that make sense to anyone else? Am I just being thick here? Like, how can you be a skeptic and also never doubt on any case that you've worked on? Like, not even once?
I have to believe that the person in front of me is truly dealing with the demonic. So I would never proceed in doing an exorcism on somebody where I still had some level of doubt. I would not even use the rite of exorcism as a diagnostic tool. I think that the rite itself is reserved for those who I truly have reached the point that beyond a doubt, this person truly is dealing with extraordinary demonic activity.
Can
So
you
I would
give
say
me?
if I work with,
So he must mean that he never doubts when he gets to the point of actually engaging in exorcism. Although he did say any case that I've worked on. So I think he was being unclear there. Given his follow-up remarks, he must still, I don't know. I'm trying, I'm trying to steal mine here. It seems like what he was actually saying is that, he's called into work in different cases. He's not always convinced. Only when he is convinced, sufficiently, and doesn't have any doubts at all, which seems like a very high bar. But anyway, only when he has no doubts at all that the person is really possessed does he go through and perform an exorcism. But also he then says apparently that never in retrospect does he have any doubts. So even that Steelman version, which wasn't like, I think that's what he meant. It wasn't exactly what he said. That's still kind of ridiculous, right? Because first of all, you should always have some doubt, even if it's very small. In the legal system, in the criminal justice system, it's beyond reasonable doubt, not beyond any conceivable doubt, right? So I think that there's already a inappropriate standard here. But then also in retrospect, when new evidence comes to light and you reflect on things you're outside of the moment and so forth, surely at least sometimes doubts will arise. You're like, I'm not sure that I fully exhausted all other possibilities there. But apparently not in this guy's case. So I don't know, maybe he is much better a rationalist than I am, and just always, he never makes a mistake and just always gets to that point of exorcism when truly all other possibilities have been exhausted and there's just no scope for people like me or other skeptics to doubt at all. And therefore he can be fully and completely convinced, because after all, he is the last person to be convinced that someone is possessed, as he said at the start. This is just ridiculous. This is a vow of prior skepticism and sort of theatrics to make himself, I guess, feel better, or to make it seem more legitimate to the audience. I don't actually believe that there's much skepticism at all that goes into these sorts of investigations. Yes, I'm sure that he doesn't believe every person who claims to be possessed actually is. But in terms of genuine skepticism, like trying to rule things out in a systematic, careful way, like an actual skeptic, like James Randi style would, I don't believe that happens. At least that he doesn't engage in that, because of the sorts of comments that he makes on these shows. It's just ridiculous nonsense. There's no evidence of sort of genuine skepticism about these things. And we'll see what he
Never
says.
doubted after the fact.
Yeah, can you give me a specific
doubt it after
example
the
of someone?
fact.
Obviously, use different names, maybe switch up their gender, whatever you need to do to maintain their privacy. But what is an example of something that you saw, something that you experienced that led you to that point of moral certitude?
I've witnessed a lot of things over the years that may seem impossible, far-fetched. Training in Rome, I saw a body of a possessed person begin to levitate. I've seen demons manifest, eyes rolled in the back of the head.
What is it with demons and levitation? Like, how is that even evil? It's just weird. I don't understand that at all. God needs to allow demons to possess people so that they can levitate those people something, and therefore those people can learn good from evil. Like, how does levitation help that? Am I missing something here? Where does levitation fit into that? Anyway.
Foaming at the mouth, growling and snarling, the eyes refocus with the most hatred, evil.
Okay, so I don't think people can actually levitate, although people can appear to levitate with certain tricks and so forth, or it could be memory biases, socialization. There's various effects there. But people foaming at the mouth, growling, rolling eyes, that sounds like a seizure, my man. Like, a person could need like serious help. It may not be a seizure. Of course, it could be someone performing or the effects of drugs or many other things. But I don't know how that is supposed to be strong evidence for possession. Like, there's lots of reasons why someone might be snarling, eyes rolling, foaming at the mouth. And I don't know why you would ever consider that to be evidence of possession. I guess levitation is just demonstration of supernatural powers, events. Well, yes, I suppose it would be if you could, just genuinely levitate. But what does that do? How does that enhance God's sort of plan for us to learn morality or right from wrong or the consequences of sin or something, like all of that stuff we were talking about? It doesn't seem to connect in any way.
Look that you can imagine, knowing that this is not that person anymore, but this is now a different consciousness, if you will, that's treating that body as if it were its own. I've seen eyeballs turn green in front of me. Pupils become slanted. I've seen
eyeballs turn green in front of me. It's amazing these things can never be caught on camera. And there is a little video on that coming up, so we'll look forward with eagerness to see what fair and legitimate reasons are brought forward as to why those things can't be captured on camera. But I'm just imagining someone's eyes going green in front of me. I don't think that can happen that quickly. Obviously, people's eyes can go green. I think that's a sign of kidney failure. But I don't think it can happen that quickly. The most obvious explanation that would come to mind is a change in the lighting that made someone's eyes appear green, which seems quite plausible in certain circumstances, right? But who knows exactly what the circumstance is there. Yeah, well, it is appropriate to play devil's advocate on an episode about demons, so that's fair. I agree. It seems like the idea is that these are manifestations of some type of supernatural evil power, but it's just not really clear what significance these manifestations have. Most of them don't seem to actually harm anyone, like the levitation, the growling, eyes turning green, rolling of the eyes and foaming at the mouth and things like that. There's not really any long-term harm that's caused to people there. I mean, if it really was demons, if it's an underlying medical condition that's causing these symptoms, then there could be harm. But it seems it's just like kind of weird and creepy. And so how does that help someone to learn from their mistakes, right? It could just be like, oh, here's a cool little parlor trick that I can do when I don't know, go to the spiritual edge of the cliff, whatever that means. I don't know how you exactly invite demons in. It's kind of silly, right? Because it seems like the people who would be most interested in inviting demons in would be atheist skeptics like me, because like we don't have any respect for that sort of stuff. I mean, obviously we don't believe in it, right? But the point is, why wouldn't people like us, if it were real, like suppose it was actually real, why wouldn't we invoke the demons and then it would work, right? And we'd have evidence of the demons and we could document it, right? Why wouldn't people do that? And then it wouldn't necessarily prove any particular religion, but it would at least give evidence of some kind of supernatural force. If you could say certain words, or I don't know, draw a pentagram or play Ouija. I don't know what you're supposed to do exactly to think impure thoughts, like whatever invites demons in. If you just like did that, like certain actions, and then you could actually somewhat reliably induce these supernatural effects. Like that would be kind of very easy to document throughout all of human history and all of humanity. Like someone would be able to document this and do it reliably enough to have robust evidence of this. And the very people who would be most likely to do it apparently are also the people who are most susceptible to demonic possession, right? It's the spiritually dark people and all this sort of stuff. See, it doesn't, like, the usual way this works is the only people who could get God to do a miracle are people who are sufficiently pious that they wouldn't test God by requiring him to do a miracle. It's like, oh yeah, well the prophet or the Pope or the spiritual lights or whoever it is, they could ask God to do a miracle, but they're so faithful that they don't need to do it, right? It would be testing God, and they have such faith anyway, right? Like, so there's this sort of get out of jail free card there. But in this case, it's the opposite. The very people who are most susceptible to demonic possession apparently are the people who would be most interested and willing to try it out, right? And somehow, yet we have no evidence of any of this actually happening. Like, no quality evidence, no demonstrable scientific replicable evidence, or really any evidence of any quality at all. So it's kind of bizarre that it works this way, and they don't see any tension there.
Seen demons, once they've manifest, the body drops to the floor and slithers like a snake. I've seen demons that
people can just do that, right? Like, some people can contort their body. The contortionists, like, that's a job that some people have, and whether or not they have that job, some people are flexible, and it may look like that they're moving like a snake. Why would they do that? Well, if they think they're possessed, or they have some mental illness, or they're on drugs, or they just like the attention, they're confused, all sorts of reasons. Again, the only thing here that seems truly inexplicable naturalistically would be actual levitation, and all we have is reports of it. So I suspect that there wasn't real levitation. It was people thinking there was levitation. But even most of these, even if you take them at face value, they're just not very impressive. Let alone the question, well, what's the point of them anyway? Like, what do they establish? Apparently nothing.
then will draw pentagrams on mirrors with blood from the body of the person that they're possessing. And again, whenever somebody is possessed, it's so important to make the clear distinction.
This is all just Hollywood stuff. It's like, I just watched a review of the movie Signs, right? The M. Night Shyamalan film from like 20 years ago. And that film is about an alien invasion. And there's some spooky scenes like in the cornfield and stuff where, you know, you hear sounds and you get the sense of, oh, that there's a presence here. And, you know, famously at the end of one of the scenes, you just sort of see an alien's leg just sticking out of the cornfield, and who then quickly sort of moves off, so you don't see them properly. But and that gives a very sort of unnerving atmosphere as you watch the film. The thing is, though, if you watch it to the end and then, like, when you know the story, and if you watch it again with it fresh in your mind and realize what's actually happening, it's like aliens have invaded and they're kind of just hanging around. Well, aliens are doing things all over the world, but at least some of them are just sort of hanging around these isolated farms, just sort of walking around naked in fields at night and like getting locked in cupboards and not really doing anything, just being kind of weird. It doesn't really make any sense. Like, why are they doing this? It's almost as if they know it's a movie and are just trying to spook the audience. It's like they know the camera is there. It seems like it's the case for the demons as well. They're foaming at the mouth. Their eyes are going green. They're drawing pentagrams in blood. Like, do they know it's a movie? Like, or think it's a movie? Like, are they just doing this for the camera? Or maybe because they've seen it in Hollywood movies and are unconsciously or consciously replicating things that they've seen in their culture. I think that's actually a far more reasonable explanation than for some reason demons do this for inexplicable reasons. It's just such a joke. I don't know how anyone can take this seriously. Sorry, just having a quick look at chat. For me, the actual question is, where does he fall on the spectrum of credulous to dishonest? Is this very strong memory bias or fabrication? Oh, is it Friar Vincent Lampert? Oh, I have no idea. I mean, I think he's thoroughly convinced himself by this point, but like how exactly he gets that position, I don't know. But at some point, you're so far in that you just sort of buy into your own propaganda, I guess. But you can never know someone's true mind.
Between the person as an individual and the demon that's now treating that body as if it were its own. So once somebody is possessed, all the actions of the body are now wholly defined by the demon and no longer by that person as an individual. So when somebody is possessed, I would never say Jane Doe did this or Jane Doe said that. I would always say the demon said that. When I was working with somebody and the demon.
That raises very interesting philosophical and metaphysical questions about how that can possibly work, but let's not even get into that here.
Manifested, and that's when the eyes turned green and the pupils became slanted. Then the deep voice says to me, because I said, Jesus is the one who can help you. That caused the demon to manifest, and the demon said, who's he? He has no power over us. And then later on in the exorcism, the demon says to me, you can't get rid of us. We've been here too long, and you're not strong enough. So again, there's that sense of taunting. Demons will manifest. They don't really want to. They want to remain hidden, as I mentioned earlier, but they're so arrogant.
They want to remain hidden. Why? What's their goal? Didn't we hear from the previous guy that the whole point of God allowing demon possession is so that people can see the negative consequences of that and learn from it? But if demons, I mean, I guess demons could want to remain hidden, but God's made it so that they can't. But then isn't it, don't these manifestations happen when they're confronted, when the demons are confronted by, people like Lampert here? I don't know how it's all supposed to work.
And that they cannot accept the fact that they're being commanded to do something by a creature that they consider to be inferior to themselves. And it finally reached the point where they just lash out. I have a colleague of mine that doing one of his first exorcisms, the demon manifested and basically said to him, you stupid monkey, who are you to tell me what to do? Lucifer, who fell and became Satan, his ultimate goal was he wanted God to unite his nature with his own. But God chose to unite his nature with humanity. And that's something that Lucifer could not accept. So he lost his true identity. Lucifer being light bearer, closest to the throne of God, a seraphim angel, but he fell into darkness because he rejected God's plan for him. Demons are very intellectual. When God created the angelic world, he gave them infused knowledge. They didn't have to.
Now that would be interesting, right? If you're possessed by an intellectual you're possessed by an intellectual demon, and instead of like frothing at the mouth and drawing pentagrams and levitating, he just like sits you down and like goes through, okay, so premise 1 of the fine-tuning argument, premise 2, here's why it's irrational to believe in God. He just like gives a sermon, like he possesses a priest or something, and then gives a sermon to the congregation, like painstakingly breaking down all of the arguments. Now that's a demonic possession I could get behind, but like apparently that never happens, or maybe that is actually what happens, but we just don't realize it. Maybe all of the counter apologists like me are secretly possessed, and we don't realize. I don't know. The idea that they're very intellectual, but all you hear about is this sort of wacky nonsense that doesn't seem to make any sense is kind of a bit of an interesting
to learn anything. It's like a computer being downloaded with information. So God creates these intellectual beings and then says to them, with all the knowledge that I've given you, will you now complete your creation by uniting your free will with mine? And then Lucifer, based on the book of Revelation, talks about his tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky. Lucifer rejected God.
No, I'm not even going to go into that.
His decision to rebel against God reverberated through the choirs of angels, and then 1/3 of the angels fell along with him. And then we know that they were cast down to the earth, where they will be here until the final judgment at the end of time. The devil was cast out of heaven, but he wasn't cast out of creation. God can still use the devil to bring about some greater good that God may have.
Let's go ahead now and turn to our next caller. And our next caller thinks
I wanted to do my homework, but my demon didn't. Well, maybe it would be the other way around. Like, you don't want to do your homework, but the demon does, because they're very intellectual and they don't get much of an opportunity to, practice their skills, right? So you just get possessed, does your homework, maybe just writes a mean message or something. I don't know. Yeah. So the bottom line here is, do exorcists ever doubt what they've seen? The answer is no, despite the fact that they're very skeptical, and he's the last person to believe that anyone is actually possessed. He also never doubts anything that he's seen in terms of like demonic possession or manifestations, and never has doubts in retrospect as well. So there's another interesting little tidbit for you. Next one, we're just gonna, there's such a profusion of demonic activity here that we're going to have to go through them quickly here. Next one, how does an atheist become an exorcist? Can't remember if I reviewed anything by this guy before. I'm also losing track of how many different exorcists he's had on the channel. I think it's at least 4, but it may be more than that. I think Lampert's the OG and the most commonly reoccurring character, but I think I've seen this Carlos guy before as well. Anyway, I hate this coming up stuff. Like,
yeah,
what?
How does an atheist become an exorcist?
Well, he needs a conversion. First of all, I converted when I was in college, and I went on a retreat. On that retreat, I had an experience with the Eucharist. I came out of that retreat a believer. Why would I even have gone to such a retreat? Because the group of students that were putting it on were very committed to their faith. They're very Catholic, they're very Christian, they were very just in love with Christ, and Christ was the center of their life. And that was powerfully attractive. They radiated a peace, and it was a peace that I knew I didn't possess. I just found myself, as I got to know them more and we had classes together, I could see that they were very intelligent people. They were not stupid. And yet I was dumbfounded by their belief in God, because my thinking insofar as God's existence went, well, if God exists, why is there so much evil in the world? Why can the little girl down the street be kidnapped and murdered? If you were God, would you permit that in your world? I wouldn't. If God exists...
No sane person would. Like, when you have the power of God, remember. If you were just a human, if you were just had human level cognition and powers, you may need to permit things like that to happen, because, you know, we only have finite means to deal with issues. And if you try to solve one problem, it may cause other problems, right? But God is not bound by things like that, only logical necessity. And apparently he couldn't figure out any better way of running reality than by allowing, you know, that girl to be kidnapped, and whatever other examples you want to multiply. The excuses given are just really lame. Anyway, let's not get sidetracked here, but I think that's a good question.
Different religions in the world, each one contradicting
another
the
good
next.
question.
If you were God, would you permit different religions in the world? I wouldn't. And the third one, and this was by far the most significant, that the most entrenching of the atheism that I subscribe to, was the fact that, hey, if God exists, why does he hide himself? Why doesn't he just peel back the sky and reveal himself? Why do we have to take his existence on faith? If you were God, would you hide? I wouldn't. And so given these three states of affairs, given that the world is so constructed in this manner, I thought that was conclusive proof that God did not exist. And all-knowing, all-good, all-loving God is in his existence is incompatible with the existence of these three states of affairs.
How did you sort of overcome those objections?
Living in atheism. I mean, so atheism was very much an intellectual conclusion. It was the conclusion of an intellectual process. I wasn't happy about it because I could recognize that we are wired by nature to want to live forever. We are wired for eternity.
Wired by nature to want to live forever. I don't know if that's true. Wired by nature to want to live forever. There is a, I don't know what you call it, a movement, a intellectual strain, a set of people with common interests relating to radical life extension, relating to things like cryonics, cryogenics, like preserving people after death for later to be revived, and also mind uploading, you know, like taking a scan of your brain and uploading it to a computer so you can be immortal, or at least live for much longer. And there's sort of less crazy versions of that just involve like using utilizing developments in medicine to radically extend lifespans. Anyway, the point of this is that when a lot of people hear about these ideas, they're kind of horrified and get scared and think, oh no, death's important, it's part of life, it makes life meaningful, blah, blah, blah. Like you hear, I'm pretty sure I've seen survey results on this, although I forget the specifics. But anyway, the point is, I don't know very much about what people think about living forever, but at least I do know that in that context, a lot of people seem very unsettled by the idea of living forever. I think death is important. Now, maybe they want to have an afterlife, right? I suppose that's, maybe you can hold those two beliefs. You think it's important to die, but have an afterlife. Anyway, the point is, if you're going to make a claim like we're naturally wired to want to live forever, I think there should be some evidence for that. And I'm not sure that that's actually true at all. I don't think many people have thought about the idea of actually living forever and what that would mean. I think people like the idea of being able to see deceased friends and loved ones again. Absolutely, people like that idea. But I don't know that people actually think about the idea of living forever and what that entails. I think it's just sort of something that they put out of mind. They only think about the nice things about it and not the actual reality of it. And maybe that's why people are a bit more uncomfortable with the idea of living forever in this life, because it's automatically kind of more tangible and not just this vague sense of, oh, I'll see my family again, but not really have any sense of what that actually means. So anyway, I don't know that people actually have this sort of natural wiring of a desire to live forever. And even if they did, I don't know what that would prove.
Eternity, so to speak. And the threat of our lives suddenly ending, our existence coming to a close, is not a pleasant thought. And it gives us an anxiety. I mean, I was honest enough to recognize that. What happened simultaneously with that is I encountered this small group of students, and there was a couple of professors that were very committed, deeply committed to their Christian faith. They wore it on their sleeves. There were no qualms from within them of defining themselves by it. I remember seeing, like on Ash Wednesday, they had ashes on their forehead. He turns and he faces me again, and he says, I guess it just wasn't God's will for me to have a car right now. And he could still enjoy the cup of coffee in front of him. You know, our conversation from that point lasted probably another 45 minutes or so. It lasted a long time. I couldn't remember a single detail from that conversation 5 minutes after that point, 5 minutes after it happened, because I was just mesmerized by the fact that he had so much peace inside him that it didn't bother him that his car was destroyed. I mean, He could not care less. And so that kind of peace was something so different. I'd never seen that in anybody else. I knew that I didn't have it, and I wanted it. But he had a profoundly amazing art of living. He just lived well. He lived better than anybody else. When the invitation to go on this retreat came about, then I really didn't know what a retreat was. I just knew that I was going to be hanging out with these guys. In fact, when they said the word retreat, what I understood was vacation. And so immediately,
yeah, vacation with the Bible, though, there's always strings attached. I've been to some of these sorts of things before. What was I going to say? Yeah, so this idea about, this is interesting. He seems to have initially been attracted to Christianity by what I could describe as psychological benefits of feeling a sense of peace despite difficulties or challenges in life. And the thing is, I don't doubt that there are Christians who find that in their faith, though I don't know that most do, but that's an empirical question I don't have the answer to. But I mean, it's definitely the case that other people have that sort of tranquility and ability to deal with adversity. That's one of the major tenets of Buddhism, is to sort of lack attachments. Doesn't mean you literally don't care about anything, but it means that if a bad thing happens, you don't let it get to you. You accept it as part of life and kind of move on, and don't let it get you down or angry or jealous and things like that. But that's a tenet of many religious and many philosophies as well, like Stoicism, which is a philosophical belief that I'm quite partial to myself. The idea, again, that you don't have sort of strong emotional and sort of psychological egoistic attachments to things, and you're stoic and sort of balanced and able to accept what comes and not cling to things that are outside your control. Many of the world's great religious and secular philosophies have emphasized this point, because it is part of human psychology, I think, to sort of become overly emotionally attached to things that are outside our control, and that leads to negative emotional and cognitive consequences. And it's important to be able to let go of those. I think that people can learn that from Christianity, though I don't know that many do. And I don't think at all you need Christianity for that, nor is it even really the primary teaching of Christianity. In fact, it seems like the primary teaching of Christianity is the opposite, is that you should cling to something outside of you as your only hope and your literal salvation, which I think is actually a very unhealthy ideology. But anyway, so this doesn't really seem like a very good argument in favor of Christianity for a whole bunch of reasons, as I said, because I think that the teachings, insofar as that there's validity to what he's talking about, that those teachings can be found elsewhere. And I don't even think that that's really an important part of Christian teaching. And nor to say anything about whether the teachings are actually true, even
my
if they can
response
be
was,
helpful.
yeah, sure, I'll bring the beer. And so it was, I went to this encounter, to this retreat house, and I knew it was a Eucharistic in a fancy container.
Kind of bored of this, though,
monstrances,
because
which displays
we're supposed to
the
be finding
sacred host.
demons here. We're supposed to be finding demons here. So let's not get distracted.
Years later, I had the start of my next shift. Again, nothing extraordinary happened, but I was surprised how quickly the hour went by. And there was definitely a sense of peace, a peace that began in that first shift, but it wasn't an overwhelming peace. It was just a peace that was strong enough to take away a kind of anxiety that I was experiencing, wondering, how am I going to kill an hour doing nothing but sitting here? During that second shift, that peace was much more palpable. It still was not overwhelming. Whereas if you can call the strength of the peace on the first shift to be a thread, now it was definitely a string or a rope. There was no desire at all to leave that chapel. But I simply chalked that up to my determination that, you know what, I signed up for these 3 days here, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to chicken out. I'm going to respect the yes that I gave these people for this invitation, and I'm going to honor them by fulfilling my time here. At the end of that second shift, I left, and I was just so surprised at how fast it went by. By my third shift, which occurred in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., that was the shift where the wheels fell off the atheism wagon, so to speak. And again, I didn't see anything extraordinary. I didn't hear anything. There was nothing mystical to the senses that occurred. However, at a certain point, I knew that I was in front of Almighty God. I knew that I was in front of my Creator, who created me out of love, who had love for me, a profound love, and who had been waiting all of this time for this very moment. And he had engineered it to come about. I knew I was created in love, for love. Everything was different in that point. I mean, even the answers, the intellectual difficulties I had just melted away. It melted away because in that moment, God's plan, which surpasses the plan of man, came through. I knew I had never understood God. I needed God to reveal himself to me in order to understand him.
So he sat in a chapel late at night for a few days and felt kind of peaceful, perhaps because he hadn't actually taken sort of time to his own thoughts, as many people don't. And he found it a sort of a peaceful and rejuvenating experience, which certainly it can be. I'm not really sure how that gets you to Christianity. He just sort of says, and God's plan became evident. Like how? It doesn't, I don't know. I guess Craig would approve because this is sort of like the Holy Spirit witnessing or something. But I mean, this is all very well and good, but how does that get you to being an exorcist?
And this is what he was doing now. And really, what cleared the way for God to do that was the offer that I made. And so, Lord, if you can give me what I see in these men that invited me here, if you can give me the peace they have, the faith they have, the tranquility that they have, I'll give you my life. Right? Because I knew that there was nothing better than that.
It's a bit transactional. I wanted peace and tranquility in life. So if anyone could give it to me, I would just pledge my life to that philosophy. That seems a bit lame, right? And kind of self-centered. I mean, isn't it possible for someone to find peace in a false or ultimately harmful philosophy or worldview or religion? I mean, demonstrably that's the case, right? Because martyrs for many different religions, some including violent martyrs, I think often report finding this kind of sense of tranquility or peace or comfort in their cause, and also political causes as well. So this doesn't seem to me to be a very robust method of establishing the truth of anything, or even if it's a good thing, right? The fact that you psychologically feel good about it or feel peaceful or whatever, that might be nice, but you need more than that. And it seems pretty superficial and kind of uncritical to just go with whatever. I mean, atheists are sometimes accused of this, just doing whatever feels good. How is this not just doing whatever feels good to you at the time? I don't understand. This seems incredibly substanceless.
There was nothing that life could offer you that was more. And so in that moment, I received the gift of faith, and I've never doubted it. And I look back at that moment frequently. I think about it, and it's just as stunning and striking for me today. It's just as shocking as it was back when it happened. Because in that moment, my life drastically changed. So how does one go from that to becoming an exorcist? Well, subsequently...
Well, we've got 14 minutes on... So the short answer was he went from being a convinced atheist to being a devout, I guess, Christian. I did skip a few parts, but the substance of it was he saw Christians who seemed peaceful and... oh, hang on. Demonic spasm there. Now, some diehard skeptics call it a sneeze, but we all know it's a demonic spasm. Anyway, he went from being a devout diehard skeptic and atheist to being a devout Christian because he saw some people who seemed to be at peace and comfortable in life, and then sat in a church for a few hours during the night and felt really good about that and peaceful. And then he just decided to be a Christian for the rest of his life. So not really much of a substance there. That gets you from atheist to devout Christian. Let's see how you get to become an exorcist in the last 2 minutes.
There was another retreat I was on. It was 7 years after that
retreats, man.
With that retreat it gave me faith. So life was different now. My identity was different. I finished my undergraduate studies. I went on and did graduate studies, and then I started a career in teaching. And it was 3 years into my career in teaching, I got a call to the priesthood. I was again on a retreat, and so I entered seminary, received my formation as a seminarian, and then was ordained and began ministry. And it was during... Actually, the year prior to my being a priest, that I was called into my first exorcism. It was a house infestation. At the time, I was ministering at a church staffed by 3 priests, and they served as exorcists for the diocese. They did the exorcism cases, but they worked with people. And there was just so many cases coming at them that when something like a house infestation would come by, like strange phenomena, harassment stuff happening in a home, one of them just turned to me one day and said, "Hey, Deacon, batter up, go get rid of the devils."
Harassment stuff happening in the home. So there's like domestic violence or a difficult domestic situation happening in a home, and we attribute that to demons. Why? Like, why do we need that as a... Can we not quite readily explain that without needing to postulate demons? But also, I thought the whole point of demons was that God adds them into the mix. He allows him to possess people as a way of... So people have to invite them in, and then it's a way for people to sort of see the negative consequences that come from allowing that evil in or something. Not very well articulated, but that's the gist of it. But how does that affect buildings? Like, did the building make a choice that meant that it... Well, actually, there's precedent for that, right? Because remember, there's a fig tree, and Jesus, like... He says you've been a bad fig tree, and like strikes it down or something. So maybe buildings can be bad as well. That might explain these infestations. If the building does a bad thing, then it can be infested by demons, and I guess negatively affect the people there. That seems a bit mean, but I don't know. Maybe God needs the world to work that way. I don't know.
There's the holy water. There are the prayers. make sure you're back by 4 o'clock because we're all going to dinner at 4:30. So that's really how it came back, how it came about. And so I went into that house, and I just kind of knew by instinct. Maybe it was through reading I had done, or maybe it was through conversations with these exorcists. I just don't know. And if it did come about this way, I certainly don't have a memory of it. But I knew that if the devil is there, if the devil is in a place, whether in a person, whether in a thing, in a location, he's there.
Devil's in the details.
For a reason. That he just didn't all of a sudden set up shop there. He had to be given some kind of jurisdiction there, some kind of rights. And that my job as an exorcist was going to be to discover those rights and take them away. That is the MO. And that remains the MO today. And so I went into this house and I said an exorcism prayer and I blessed it. And that ended the phenomena for the family that was living there.
But doesn't that take away people's freedom? Like, okay. So people in this house have obviously allowed the demons in, right? We know that has to happen. Maybe the house itself did a bad thing. I don't know, but someone did a bad. Demons come in. Not really clear what they're doing. I guess they're adding to the spirit of strife and discord or something, whatever the hell that means. Then he goes there, Friar Carlos, and says a prayer. But and then the demons have to leave or decide to leave or whatever. I don't know why they're receptive to prayers, but whatever. Apparently they are. But doesn't that undermine the freedom of the people who made the choice to allow the demons in? Isn't their free choice being undermined by someone externally coming and doing the prayer? That seems contradictory to the whole point, which is, no, the person has to overcome their demons, like literally or figuratively, right? In order for them to learn from the experience. But no, someone just comes in and then they do a magic spell. I'm sorry. They say a prayer and then the demon is removed. Like that seems like it's contrary to the whole purpose of moral and spiritual growth, right? If you can just bring in someone from the outside and then they, click their heels or whatever, and the demon's gone. I don't understand how that's supposed to work. It's almost as if like there's no coherent theory behind any of this, and it's just an ad hoc collection of anecdotes strung together through implausible medieval theology and modern claptrap and scientific sounding words thrown in. Yeah, so still waiting on the former skeptic, so I was an atheist but heard this apologetic argument and this reasoning convinced me. Yeah, I mean, I think there are some, but they're pretty rare, and probably even rarer when we're talking about exorcists. So let's recap. His reason for becoming a Christian was because it sounded good and made him feel peaceful. And his reason for becoming an exorcist was someone asked him to do it. And it seemed like the right idea. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I'm trying not to be mean, but there's just no substance there. Like that was his reason for converting. It made him feel peaceful. It made him feel good. And then his reason for doing the exorcism seemed to just be someone asked him to do it. And he was just like, I don't know, I guess this needs doing. I guess if Satan's there, then I should go and cuss him out. Like there was no reason there. There was no justification. There was no intellectual substance to anything. That was just pathetic. Like what is that? Well, okay, that was how an atheist becomes an exorcist. I was honestly hoping for something more, but that's what we got. What's the next one? We're not going to do a whole... Stop. Oh, this possession test worked too well? No, that's the wrong one. Wait. Oh, here it is. Okay, yes, let's do this one. I think this is another excerpt from the same interview, but...
That I've employed in the...
I hate this coming up thing. It's so annoying.
Fling it on T.
Why would I want to rewatch part of the video and put it at the start? Like, it's such a annoying... Anyway, okay.
Much of that skepticism transferred over when
Exorcist
became convinced.
I can't even tell when the proper video starts.
Skepticism transferred over when you became convinced that Christianity is true, Catholicism is true.
Every exorcist, if he's worth anything, is skeptical by nature. You have to be skeptical,
we hear that.
Because exorcism itself, the state of being, exorcism is an illness. It's a spiritual illness, but it can resemble very much mental illness. Frankly, some people in the world are just so strange, foolish, needy, that they at times will even fake demonic oppression in order to receive attention. So you have three states that can appear very similar, that can exhibit very similar symptoms to actual demonic possession, mental illness, and fakery. And so it's the job of the exorcist to find out what is going on here. And it's not just his...
I don't accept that those are the only options, right? Because I think that there are people who are not mentally ill who, unless you define belief that you are possessed as a mental illness itself, but I suspect that that's not, I don't think that that's going to be sufficient to define someone as mentally ill, because people can have all sorts of illogical beliefs that aren't necessarily mental illness, right? Like believing in demons. But I think that someone can believe sincerely, without being mentally ill, that they are possessed and not be faking. Now, what gets them to that position? I mean, a whole what gets people to the position of believing in any sorts of wacky things, like many complicated psychological and sociological factors, which we could talk about. And I'd at some point like to look at more of the literature about this, though I don't know how well it's been studied. But the point is, this is one of the classic false dichotomies that we see. I guess it's a trichotomy, right? From apologists, which is that either you're faking, like you're deliberately lying, or it's like mentally ill, like you're crazy, or it's true in the sense of like being genuine supernatural or something. This is the Lord Liar Lunatic. It's exactly the same thing. He's either lying deliberately, or he's crazy, or it's real. Exact same logic here. And although people lying and people being crazy are genuine phenomena, and they explain some proportion of sort of supernatural claims or miracle claims and things like that, I think the largest category of explanations for all of these phenomena is people who are somewhere between the extremes of like not being full on mentally ill, although they maybe have disordered thinking in various ways, and not being completely lying, although they may be degrees of self-deception, but to some extent genuinely sincerely believing in what they are doing or seeing or reporting or experiencing, but being genuinely mistaken. And that whole interesting nexus of the sort of psychological and sociological phenomena that generate these sort of sincere but false reports from otherwise generally mentally well people is just glossed over and ignored. And I document a lot of this in my book, Unreasonable Faith. I haven't spruiked it in a little while, so let me just grab it. Yeah, here we go. I haven't held it up in a little while, so thought might as well. So in the chapter on the resurrection argument, I talk about and document some of these processes as to how I think people develop belief in sort of supernatural phenomena without requiring mental illness or deliberate forgery and fakery, though, again, those things do happen. It's very interesting, and I think it's something that apologists just completely ignore. And the reason they do that is because it's usually easy, or at least, yeah, it's easy to sort of dismiss the idea that these otherwise normally appearing people are just crazy or mentally ill. Of course, there's a sort of stigma and inappropriate understanding of what mental illness is that goes under that as well. And so that's sort of rejected. And then also the idea that, oh, it's just deliberate fakery and fraud is rejected for various reasons, because again, it's often sort of impolite to suggest that, and the people otherwise seem sincere. And so, you know, that's seems implausible, at least in many cases, right? And so then by this pseudo process of elimination, you reach the conclusion, oh, it must be genuine, where in fact, no, all we've eliminated is sort of those extreme options. Now we have to face the very interesting and complicated story as how someone could possibly come to believe this genuinely and without you know, mental illness underlying it, but nevertheless be wrong, right? And that's just sort of ruled out at the outset. Notice that that's happened here as well. So that tells you that this guy is a crap skeptic, because he hasn't even, it's not that he doesn't believe that people can be mistaken, non-mentally ill people can mistakenly, falsely believe that they are possessed without actually being possessed. It's not that he just doesn't think that. He hasn't even apparently acknowledged the possibility of that existing. It's like not even on the radar for him, apparently. And that tells you that he's a bad skeptic, because he hasn't even thought about this, evidently. And likewise throughout, like we never really see this possibility acknowledged. It's always about mental illness or drug. Well, he hasn't mentioned drugs either, I suppose. But it's always like mental illness, drugs, or fakery. And we just sort of never acknowledge that the other potential aspects of human psychology and sociology that lead to this, that can lead to these sorts of reports and experiences. And I think that that's the mark of bad skepticism. When you're not acknowledging other possibilities, you're not seriously investigating them, you're not trying to find ways that you could be wrong or alternative explanations. You're just sort of focusing on the easiest ones. Not that it's always easy to rule out fakery or mental illness, but sort of the more extreme cases that are easier to rule out compared to the complex mix of human psychology, which is very difficult often to rule out. Anyway, so I find that very unsatisfying.
Job to identify whether the devil is here or not. We are pastors of souls. If someone has mental illness, I take it upon myself to help the person in that state. I'm not a physician. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I can't treat the illness, but certainly I can help the person discover the illness and to receive a diagnosis from someone who is competent. And in so doing, I'm pastoring that soul. I'm giving care. I'm giving the care of Christ, the care of the church to that soul. And the same goes for somebody who is faking. I mean, will I be frustrated if I encounter somebody like that?
That was a weird edit.
This person has his or her own illness. Christ, the care of the church to that soul. And the same goes for somebody who is faking. I mean, same goes for somebody who is faking. I mean, if I encounter somebody like that, well, absolutely. Same goes for somebody who is faking. I mean, same goes for some. Well, absolutely. Will I be frustrated if I encounter something like that? Well, absolutely. But this person has his or her own illness. And if the person is helpable, I want to help the person coming out to come out of that state. So skepticism is our bread and butter. And we never take it as a given that someone who comes forward stating, I need the ministry of exorcism, that person is in fact possessed, right? We assume that the symptoms and the phenomena are rooted in natural causes. We make that as the default. But at the same time, and this is a mistake that I think many exorcists have made, it is entirely possible, and in fact common, for someone who is demonically possessed to also have mental illness. So these are not mutually exclusive states.
Bit of overdetermination here. That's going to be a problem. Which part is due to the demonic illness and the demonic infestation? Which part is due to the mental illness? This is actually quite common, right? Because I've read about this when people in, well, not limited to, but more common in societies in like sub-Saharan Africa, where there's less education, less literacy, and less exposure to, I guess, Enlightenment ideas, there's much more common belief in, say, witchcraft. And not just sort of abstract answering on a survey that you believe in witches, like actually, paying people to put spells on other people and believing that this is a common cause of events in life and so forth. It's a big part of culture in some places. And anyway, from what I've read, it's not uncommon for when people are given education about modern understandings of medicine and so forth, they might say something like, oh yes, this disease is caused by a virus and also witchcraft. They don't dispense with the superstitious belief. They sort of append it to or fuse it with modern scientific beliefs, which is an interesting phenomena that I guess humans tend to do things like that. And this reminds me of that here, where it's a refusal to give up the idea that there is any such thing as demons, but at the same time acknowledging modern scientific understandings of mental illness by kind of fusing them together and saying, oh yeah, of course the person has a mental illness. They're also possessed by a demon. That was the devil. Yeah, I guess the devil wanted me to make fun of the weird edit. Well, it's hard to tell sometimes, I suppose.
So what you want to determine is the symptoms that are afflicting this person now, the symptoms that have brought the individual into your office and they're sitting here in front of you. What is the cause of those? And so that is the diagnosis is what occupies most of our time. And we have different tests for that. But certainly you never only do psychological testing. You never only do medical analysis, right? The priest, the exorcist, is not a referral service. If somebody comes to the church and is asking for prayer, well, the first thing we do is not send them away to go to some other professional. That would be a scandalous thing to do. Somebody's coming to you for help. Well, you help them. So I always will pray.
That is one of the most ridiculously idiotic things that I've ever heard anyone say. So imagine someone came to the priest who had, I don't know, they'd just been in an explosion and their leg was blown off and bleeding profusely. And for whatever reason, this person said, please pray for me. So what should you do? Should you pray for them? Or should you call an ambulance? Now, maybe you could pray for them while the ambulance is coming. But the point I'm making is, obviously, if you see that someone needs help that you cannot provide, you should refer the person to that service. Or you should, especially when it's urgent, you should get them to that service as quickly as you can. You shouldn't just take at face value the fact that they're asking you for help and say, oh, well, they're asking me, so I have to help them. I'm not going to refer them straight to someone else. Like if someone comes to this guy as an exorcist and asks to be exorcised, and he's very confident that this person has schizophrenia, let's say, you shouldn't humor them, right? You should direct them to mental health services, right? Now, I know that is he a friar or a priest or whatever he is? Well, I don't know. Whatever does it actually say here? whatever his role is. Like, I guess they're always going to pray for people, right? But regardless of whatever else happens. But the point is, the idea that you'd sort of always minister to them and not immediately refer them on to someone else is just ridiculous to me. Like, of course you should do that immediately if that's the kind of help they need and you can't provide that. That just seems absurd that you wouldn't do that
with such a person. Now, that person may exhibit demonic symptoms immediately. If there is a demon there, when somebody is praying, exorcist or not, if somebody has the faith of Jesus Christ and is praying, that prayer is repulsive to the demon. It is demon kryptonite, if we can speak that way. It causes him pain, and so he's going to react. He may react in.
How is this not just superstitious thinking? Like, does the prayer have to be sincere? He said something about if a believer is praying. So I imagine if someone insincerely said the same words, it probably wouldn't have the same effect. So it's not actually the sound. It's something about the intention, or maybe it's inviting the Holy Spirit in or something. But couldn't the Holy Spirit just come in by itself? And also, if the person who became possessed allowed the demon in, then isn't it overriding that person's freedom to then kind of force the spirit out? Isn't the whole point, again, that it's the whole justification for this was supposed to be that it's a way for people to exercise their freedom and experience the negative consequences of allowing evil spirits in. But now again, it's if just sort of anyone who's around offers a prayer, that's so repulsive that the demon has to leave. But that seems to be overriding the freedom of the person who allowed the demon to come in the first place. And why is it the demons are so afraid of prayers anyway? Like, is it? The only way you can make sense of that is that the prayer is somehow inviting the Holy Spirit in a way that it wasn't there before, and it's like the presence of the holiness of the Spirit is repulsive to the demons. But what does that actually mean? Because it doesn't, like, the Spirit of God is everywhere. Like, it's not like it's a fluid that is actually absent in a room, and then the prayer like opens a window and then it starts leaking in. Like, surely that's not the model of how the Spirit of God works, right? It's like relational or something. So it's about that. So surely if someone is disconnecting from the Spirit of God, that's a relationship. That's a relational thing that person has to God, right? And maybe then they start hooking up with demons or something like that, right? Okay, so that's some kind of relational thing between that person and God versus the demons. But then how is that affected by someone else saying a prayer? Like a Christian says a prayer, but that doesn't have any effect on the possessed person and their connection to God. And do you have to be in proximity? Like, if you walk in a different room or get on a plane, like if you went on a plane and then to the other side of the world and prayed for the possessed person, would that still work? Like, presumably it would, right? Because demons don't have a physical location. Like, when they're possessing someone, they're interacting with that person in a certain way, but they're not actually like located there. Likewise, the Spirit of God is not physically located at any particular location. It's something to do with like having a relationship or something, or being ostracized from that relationship, right? So it shouldn't matter where you say prayers. It's about the relation, right? But how does my having a relation to Jesus, or a priest having a relation to Jesus and inviting the Spirit into him and maybe his fellow worshippers, how does that have an effect on the demon and their relationship to the person they possess? It's like, does any of this make sense to anyone? It seems like the way they're thinking about it is literally God's influence is like a fluid that is sort of like gets sucked out of rooms when there's a demonically possessed person in there. But if you're faithful enough, you can go in and like open the holy windows and open the doors, and then the fluid comes in and it sort of pushes out the evil spirits. But that's kind of ridiculous and nonsensical if you actually think about it, because God's Spirit isn't like physically located anywhere, nor is the demon. It's about like interactions and relationships. In which case, what difference does it make if other people have a relationship with God? If you don't, then them having a relationship with God, what does that do to you? It doesn't affect it in any way, unless they convince you to change your nature or to reject the Spirit yourself or something like that, like the evil spirit itself. But that's not what he's saying here. He's just saying the prayer itself is so repulsive to the demon that the demon leaves. But demons aren't physically located anywhere. So like, don't they always hear all of the prayers that happen? Or do somehow they when they possess someone, they only hear the local ones? Just none of it makes any sense. It's all nonsense. How can no one see any of this? Oh, it actually makes me angry trying to think it through, because it's like the storytelling in a bad fantasy movie, right? you know, it's like they use a spell in one context and then they're fighting an ogre or something. They're like, well, hang on, you used that spell before. Why don't you use it here? Or before it had this distance, but now it works over this distance. And like, it just doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And so it takes you out of the story. It's like, oh, you know, I was enjoying that, but now there's this inconsistency. Well, it's like that here. Like, you're trying to understand how the demon thing works, but then it turns out to just all be completely incoherent nonsense. And so you kind of get upset. Like, can you at least make it make sense internally?
He may react in a manner that is...
Yeah, this is a good example of this. Like, holy water is another good example. So God allows demons, but we can command them using God's name. And if you pray over water in the right way, the water gains the power to burn the non-physical demon. Like, why? Like, how does that work? It's all nonsense.
Visible to me, he may not. He may react in a manner that is only visible or only sensed, if you will, by the victim in front of me seeking help. But there's going to be some kind of reaction. There may be no reaction. And if there's no reaction at this point, the probability is going to be very high and increasing by the second that the heart of the problem here is mental illness. Because
so this is interesting. So if this is so ridiculous. So if they pray or maybe use holy water or whatever else, and there's a reaction, that's evidence that it was truly a demonic possession. But if there's no reaction, well, it's probably mental illness. So in other words, if the treatment works, it's proof that the diagnosis was correct, or I should say, if it appears to work, because they can't actually test for the existence of demons. They just observe behaviors, right? So if the behaviors change, they infer that the diagnosis was correct. If the treatment doesn't result in observable changes, then they infer from that the diagnosis was incorrect. Oh, it must have been something else. No, it's never that the treatment itself just didn't work. No. The treatment always works if the diagnosis was correct. I'm pretty sure there's a name for this type of reasoning in medicine, but I don't remember what it is. Like, the idea of a diagnosis is that you're supposed to use some technique to diagnose a condition, at least if the condition is well characterized. And then you can use that. Use a similar measure to assess whether the treatment is working. But ideally, the effectiveness of the treatment itself shouldn't be used in favor, shouldn't be the primary evidence to support a diagnosis. Because otherwise there's a problem with this sort of impossibility of any contrary evidence to the effectiveness of the treatment, right? It should be possible for the diagnosis to be correct and the treatment to be ineffective. You need to have that possibility. If the only way that you validate your initial diagnosis is the effectiveness of the treatment, then you've got a confound about but how can you determine when the diagnosis was correct, but the treatment was just ineffective? I'm pretty sure there's a name for that sort of reasoning in medicine, but I don't remember what it is. But anyway, it's problematic if that's your primary method of determining whether a diagnosis was correct, is just whether the treatment works. But that's exactly what he's explained here. He's explained that there's actually no way that they can tell if their treatment is effective. They simply assume that it's effective 100% of the time when the diagnosis of possession is correct. And if it's not effective, well, that must mean that it wasn't a possession. Also, it's sort of unclear to me how they identify cases where there is mental illness, but part of that mental illness is sort of tied up with belief in or responsiveness to like possession, demonic possession, or like holy water or prayers or things like that. Like if the person has schizophrenia and has disordered thinking, and they believe that they're like some people with schizophrenia hear voices in their head and they have disordered thinking about it. So they may actually believe that they're possessed when in fact that they just have schizophrenia. And they may then act out roles that they've seen on TV or otherwise of how a possessed person acts. And so they may respond to prayers or holy water or whatever. And that the reason for that is because they have schizophrenia. It's not because they're actually possessed by a demon. And I don't know how this guy's method would distinguish those two cases, especially because he said just before that people can be mentally ill and possessed. So how do you distinguish the case of people who are only possessed and there's no mental illness from people who are both mentally ill and possessed, from people who are mentally ill and the mental illness is kind of associated with or connected to ideas of possession? All of those things, it seems, would result in a response to a prayer, for example. All of those three scenarios. But in those three scenarios, the underlying cause of the condition is very different. So he doesn't actually seem to have any methodology at all even probabilistically, to distinguish between cases where people are possessed and when they're not. So again, this isn't how a real skeptic would approach this, or a real skeptic would at least be very unsatisfied with this methodology. If this is the best they can do, they should really be asking themselves serious questions about how capable are we of actually dealing with this problem of demonic possession, because we have no ability to actually assess whether it even exists or not in a given case.
When I pray, I am praying specifically against anything demonic. And if there's no reaction whatsoever, even internally to the person, so when I'm done praying, I'll always ask, as I was praying,
how do you know if there's a reaction internally to the person? How do you measure that? Maybe the person is not even aware of that. Yeah, why do I even bother?
Do you see anything, hear anything, feel anything? And I will specify that. Was there any pain in your hands, in your throat, in your stomach? Was there any agitation in you? Were there any memories that came up? Any dark, ugly images that came in your mind? Where?
Oh my gosh, this methodology is terrible. So then he asks all these leading questions. Oh, did you have any pains here? Or specific pains in this place, in this place, in this place? Did you have any dark images? Any thought? Did you think of an elephant, right? Did you happen to think of an elephant at any point? Not telling you to think of an elephant, but if perhaps you had just thought of an elephant at any time in the last 5 seconds, that could be evidence that you had a demonic possession. These are such leading questions and such generic questions that it's going to be so easy for him to elicit a yes. And remember, what a yes means is if someone answers yes to any of these very leading questions, then he's going to infer that that was an internal response to the prayer that he gave. And he's going to use that as evidence in favor of the diagnosis of possession. This is awful methodology. It's so problematic. There is no way you can separate well, in psychology, we call this experimenter bias. I guess this is more like an equivalent in a, I don't know, doctor-patient or priest and supplicant relationship. I'm not sure what the exact term is, but essentially when someone is telling you what they think you want them to hear, right? Or yeah, someone is telling you what they think you want them to say. And that's really problematic because you don't actually know if they're being sincere or just sort of humoring you or trying sort of internally to come up with something that just seems like it fits with what you are saying. So you need to be very careful in how you answer these. You ask these questions. There should be controls, and you should change the way the questions are worded. So like you ask the same question multiple ways to try to avoid it being a leading question. Actually validated psychological questionnaires and diagnostic instruments are developed to try to mitigate these sorts of problems, and they're of course not perfect. But there appears to be the methodology here is the opposite. Anything you can do to try to get any evidence that we can interpret as favoring the initial diagnosis of possession, we'll grasp at that. Oh, did you feel anything at all in any way after I just said this weird prayer in response to you calling me in to deal with demonic possession? Yes? Must have been demons. Come on, like this is a joke of a methodology.
I rested my hand on your head as I was praying. Is there pain there? Did my hand feel extraordinarily heavy? I will make.
Did my hand feel too heavy? If the person says no, he just like pushes down harder and harder. Does it feel heavy? Yes. I told you it was demons. Now we're getting something. It's like, this is so ridiculous. Did my hand feel heavy as I was pressing it on you? Oh my God.
Make specifications like that. Now I'll let them tell me what they experience. So that's the beginning of a diagnosis. Even if someone has a demon within them, you will employ psychology. You will employ medical.
You just employed psychology. You just told me how you effectively use tools of psychology to get someone to tell you what you want to hear. You want to hear that they had some kind of effect, that there was some kind of effect from praying. And so you're just using all these tools to try to get that. You're in a position of authority. You're asking them vague, open-ended, but also leading questions that have a clear answer that you're looking for. And all it requires someone to do is introspect as to whether they have felt differently in any way, emotionally, cognitively, bodily, in this situation. And I assume if they initially say no, then you're going to try again several times. And then the person's going to be looking for, is the pressure on my head feeling more than it was before? Or am I feeling colder than I was before? Or warmer? Or, whatever, more or less peaceful, like whatever it is. And they're going to be attentive to that. And many people, this is the way human psychology works, will then, because they know that that's what's expected and that is what you're expecting, will report, oh, yes, in fact, I did notice a difference. It's just a placebo effect, right? A confirmation bias. there's many effects here that are going on there, and selective attention and so forth. And it's just absolutely classic. Like, no skeptic worth their salt would think that these techniques are appropriate or even close to appropriate. There's no controls here. There's no attempt to remove any of these sort of biases and confounds. It's purely taking advantage of people's psychology to try to elicit the desired answer. And the thing is, I don't think Carlos actually realizes this. I think he realizes it kind of subconsciously. He obviously knows these tricks. But I think he's convinced himself that this is just, it's like water dowsing and cold reading and other things like that. Cold reading is probably the best example, because people can learn cold reading, learn the techniques, and still think that they're actually contacting spirits. I'm not saying all cold readers actually, like some are just consciously like self-acknowledged frauds. But others teach themselves the techniques without realizing it, and just sort of convince themselves that this is how you communicate with spirits. You just use the techniques of what are actually the techniques of cold reading. I think that that's sort of similar here. He basically has taught himself, or perhaps learned from others, how you get the right results in dealing with people who come under his attention for exorcisms. And of course, if none of it works, you just say, oh, it was just a mental illness. And so there's nothing I could do anyway. Very interesting.
Staff, because again, they are not mutually exclusive, and there can be a condition in the state of somebody who is possessed that you need to be aware of, that if you're not aware of, that medically it can be a liability to them, it can wound them, and if you're not aware of it, you're not helping them.
In my view, exorcists are not too unlike medical doctors in the sense of you look for symptoms, specific symptoms, and you'll make a diagnosis based on those symptoms. You also will have them, as you say, you'll run.
Yeah, but that's not what he just said, right? Cameron, you didn't listen to what he said. Carlos did not say he looks for specific symptoms and then makes the diagnosis on the basis of those symptoms. What he actually said, I mean, he may do that to an extent, but that isn't what he just said then. What he just said is that he applies a certain treatment, and on the basis of the response to that treatment, he determines whether the person, he makes a diagnosis, he determines whether the person was possessed or not. So that is a very problematic method of diagnosis, because it doesn't allow you to distinguish between, it effectively assumes, the way that he's described it, that the treatment is 100% effective in people who actually are possessed. And it doesn't allow you to independently check for a diagnosis separately from the effectiveness of the treatment for that condition. Very problematic method, apart from the fact that he is also, the way that he gathers evidence, or gathers symptoms, I suppose would be the analogy here, is only through response to the treatment. There's no other symptoms that he discussed as analyzing apart from someone's response to the treatment. So this would be more analogous to going into the doctor's surgery, and instead of them investigating your symptoms and checking and doing tests, running tests, and diagnostics and looking at scans and blood tests and whatever else that they do, they just start treating you with stuff and looking at the response. Now, that sometimes happens in certain contexts, like they'll try different treatments and see the effectiveness. But in modern medicine, that's not the starting point, right? That's after you've already proceeded down many steps of diagnosis and assessments of what things might work. And yeah, then there's some trial and error near the end point, because we don't have a full understanding of the human body, of course. But the point is, doctors don't start by just doing kind of arbitrary treatments or very generic sort of treatments. They'll start by investigating the symptoms. But Carlos here didn't say anything about that. He said he starts with the treatment and then investigates response to the treatment. That is not the same as what medical doctors do, or not what competent ones do anyway.
Different tests, and you'll encourage them to get psychiatric testing and blood work done, and all sorts of things done to sort of rule out these natural causes. But I guess the question that I've got for you is, you say that you're a skeptic, and that you're not just, and that's every exorcist has got to be a skeptic in order to be a good exorcist. What are the indicators that you look for to come to a diagnosis of someone is either oppressed or possessed? What are the specific things that you look for, and then how do you make that determination as a skeptic?
Sure. So the thing to understand is, if a demon is present in somebody, they may not be possessed. There's different grades of demonic hold that people can get themselves in. But what we're talking about is within a body, within an individual, that there is now a spirit that is not their own, that is present alongside theirs. And in order to understand the dynamic here, we need to understand what a human being is. A human being is not a body and a soul. It's not a body with a soul within it. We are bodies who are souls. We are ensouled bodies, if you will. So it was never.
We're ensouled bodies. Okay, so by that logic, it seems that demonic possession should be impossible, because we're a sort of unity of soul and body. So if you somehow removed our soul or detached our soul, it wouldn't be us anymore. We'd be dead, I guess. And if you attached a different soul to our body somehow, that it wouldn't be us possessed. It just wouldn't be us anymore. Is that not a corollary of what he just said? Like that we're not bodies that are sort of arbitrarily attached to a soul as if they're interchangeable. No. We're a fusion of the two. Okay, well that's fine. But then where does the demon come into that? If a demon possesses us, our body, it seems like you've killed the person. Like if they're sort of fused unity and you unfuse them, then you're not you anymore. What have I missed here?
In God's plan for there to be a separation between the body and the soul that occurs at death. That was never part of God's plan. And so we are in integration.
Well, how did it happen then?
There is no point, there's no dividing line between where your body ends and your soul begins. Right? That would be a fake artificial distinction. When you die, there is that separation and it's definitive. We can see, we look at a dead body. This person is not here any longer.
Well, it's pretty clear then. There can't be a separation between soul and body before death. So that's not what happens when you're possessed by a demon. Your soul is obviously still there. So how does another soul get connected to your body in a way that preserves your soul being there? This is not consistent with how possession's been described in other videos on Cameron's channel, by the way. But let's hear out what he's got to say.
This is the shell of who they were. So when a spirit is present, he doesn't replace the soul of the person, but he can take over the animation of the body. And this is part of the mystery of God's creation. He created humans to be capable of possessing more than one spirit inside them, right? To be capable. This, in a sense, it's not surprising. But
he just said that we don't possess a spirit. It's like fused with our body to form a unity. There's no separation between them. So look, if you think there's bodies and there's souls, and the soul's sort of attached to the body, but then can become causally disconnected and another soul comes in. Okay, that's one model of possession. It raises a whole bunch of questions, but that's one model, right? But this seems to be saying, no, there's not a soul that attaches to a body. They're fused together. They're a unity. There's no one where one ends and the other begins, right? The only way they come apart is at death. That's what he just said, okay? So then what he's saying is here's a unity of soul and body, and then somehow another, I need a third hand, another one comes in, the demon, and what exactly? What happens? What's the model here for how the demon controls the body while our soul is apparently still there and fused in unity with it the way it was before? It seems like we need an explanation of how that's supposed to make sense.
In his epistles, identifies over and over again how we are members of Christ's body. We are limbs on the body of Christ. We're body parts on that body. And so what that means is Christ's spirit enters into us. And his spirit is exactly what we receive at baptism.
Wait, so now we've got Christ's spirit as well? How many spirits have we got going on here? It's getting a bit complicated.
We receive the same spirit of Christ. The spirit of God enters into us. That spirit is what makes us holy. That spirit is what generates within us the good actions that we're called to do. That spirit leads us, it guides us, it counsels us, it informs us, teaches us. And so
the spirit of God is what generates the good actions that we're called to do. How does that fit with the whole idea of free will, though? Aren't we supposed to choose to do those good things by ourselves? But if God's spirit is coming into us, whatever that means, and leading us to do those things, isn't that a violation of freedom? I suppose you could say, yeah, but we have to invite it to come in. But that seems a bit facile, though. Like, shouldn't we have to do a bit more than just invite it? Shouldn't we have to, actually do the good work ourselves, make the good choice, instead of inviting someone to do it for us or something? I don't know. I don't see how all this is fitting together personally.
So forth. But it is possible for an evil spirit to enter inside us. It's possible.
Somehow.
And even if he's not inside us, he can be around us. Let's make another distinction so that we can get to a proper understanding, because that's what we're working towards. The devil is a fallen angel. He was created as an angel, same with all of the demons. They are fallen angels. But an angel is a being, is a spirit that has no body. So an angel is a reality, an intellectual reality. It is a spirit. Each angel is a person. But it is a person without a body. And so
yeah, okay. So demons are fundamentally different types of persons to us, right? Because he just said that humans, we're not spirits who have bodies, right? We're fused together. We're spirit bodies. And they can't come apart until death, right? And, there's no line between where the body ends and the spirit starts or something like that, right? So what all this means is that there's at least two different types of persons. There's the spirit persons who only have a soul, and then there's human persons that are sort of spirit soul unities. So the question that's going to arise there is how can bodiless spirits interact with the body of a spirit body hybrid? That seems like a very different type of thing. why did God make it so that that's even possible? And what's happening? What happens to our soul when the soul of the the spirit comes in? Like, what's it? Again, it's not like the model of they're attached and then our soul becomes detached and the other one comes in, because he said they're fused together. So what's our soul doing? It's like still there, but then there's another one come in. But it can't be that the spirit only controls our body, because he just said before that our spirits and our bodies aren't kind of separable, that you can't draw a line between where one starts and the other ends, right? So he can't say that our souls are just kind of causally detached or put on pause or something, like I had thought was the idea, as crazy as that is. He can't even say that, because there is no separation, that they're a unity. So what's happening? Like, what's the explanation of what's happening when a possession occurs?
So there is no physical limitations upon them. What does this mean? Well,
Yeah, but there's still physical limitations on our bodies, right?
Doesn't travel. It has no need to travel.
Yeah,
it doesn't have a body.
Spatial.
Therefore, it's not limited by space and time.
Yeah.
So an angel, any angel, your guardian angel, is just as present to you as he is to the planet Pluto, as he is to the farthest recess of the universe.
So this raises the question as to why physical proximity is relevant to demonic possessions, because demons aren't located somewhere, right?
Bottom of the ocean to the highest mountain. He is present in all of those locations simultaneously, because all of them are equally available to him as any other. Right? So the first thing we need to do to understand the angelic reality, and by extension the demonic reality, is to get rid of the notion that angels travel, that they have physical.
Yeah, okay, we get that. Move on.
That they have a physicality to them, right? They don't.
No physicality.
When we say a demon is inside somebody, he's not literally inside, because that would imply that he is contained within a body, right? That the body would somehow limit him, and that's not the case. What we mean by that is that the demon has somehow gained a legal jurisdiction to manipulate this body, to manipulate this person, to push his or her consciousness aside and begin inhabiting them.
Okay, well, we're already a bit stuck here, because how can, if our spirit is fused with our body, how can he just push your consciousness aside? That doesn't make sense. They're fused together. He just said that. He said there's no separation, there's no line between them, they can't be separated until death. So how can an immaterial spirit just sort of push the consciousness aside and somehow get access to the body? That just doesn't make sense. It's inconsistent with what he just said about them being fused together. Also, why does God allow this in the first place? Why does God say, I mean, he just sort of said, oh, it's a mystery. God allows that. Well, that's not a very good explanation. So there's another problem. Also, this notion of legal jurisdiction, what's that supposed to mean? Don't we have legal jurisdiction to ourselves? How can we, apparently you can abnegate that by just like drawing pentagrams or something, going to the spiritual edge of the cliff or whatever that's supposed to mean. Like, what can I do to, so this violates a pretty core concept that we currently have, like in modern society, of human rights. We can talk about the philosophical underpinnings of that, but the ideas that of self-ownership, and that there are certain things that you can not, you can't give up. They're inalienable rights, right? And one would be the idea that you have some kind of bodily autonomy, that someone else can't force you to do things. I mean, someone can restrict your freedoms if you've committed crimes, right? But you are still ultimately the owner and possessor of your body, and you can make choices of that sort. But apparently God doesn't believe that, because he's set up a system where you can do some sort of fairly poorly specified nasty things, and apparently doing so means that you have, at least temporarily, ceded the legal right to own your own body, and you can just have like demons come in and take it over, like squatters in your house. Like, what kind of a system is that? That's absolutely ridiculous. I would suggest that it would be better if God didn't allow such, I mean, it's not just that he allows them, because he had to set up the causal mechanisms that allow this to happen. And so why did he set it up that way? That's absolutely ridiculous. People shouldn't have any ability to sort of lose the autonomy over their own body because, evil spirits have decided to like take up residence. That's utterly absurd. Not to mention that it doesn't make any sense metaphysically as to what's actually happening there, but it's morally reprehensible that God would allow that anyway. It should be a basic human right, a basic principle that someone has, because this is just violating their freedom, right? Like, it's not like that they made a choice and they're experiencing the consequences of the choice. They make a choice which they don't often understand the consequences of, apparently, and then they just lose ability to actually use their own body? Like, that's crazy. Why is that a way to enhance people's freedom? Especially is because apparently you don't even have to do anything or can't do anything to rectify it. You just have to hope and wait for somebody else to say a prayer, and then somehow that lets the that somehow changes you now have the right to inhabit your own body again when previously you abdicated that right. What? None of that makes any sense.
Right? That's what we're saying. A demon is, well, angels were created with incredible intellects, right? They are not limited by any physicality. So they don't learn the way that we learn. They learn, all the knowledge they have is gained through intuition. So
intuition. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt there and suggest that he doesn't actually mean intuition. He means something else, but let's
have to reason things out, right? We'll take two pieces of information, and if they're connected, we can deduce using syllogistic thinking, using reasoning, we can derive a conclusion. They don't have to engage in that process. Whatever they have, whatever information they possess, or whatever information that we normally would need to calculate, they have instantly at their disposal. So when we look at a clear blue sky in the summer, we see immediately the sky is blue. We don't have to reason that it's blue. It's immediate to us. Angels have all of their knowledge in this manner. For us to determine the 1,000th digit of pi, the relationship of a circle, of the diameter of a circle to its circumference, we have to calculate that. An angel knows that instantly. Right? It's not even the fact that he calculates it. He doesn't have to calculate it. He knows it immediately.
So that could be very useful, because if you were a mathematician and you wanted to, I mean, do demons know all mathematical truths? So that would be interesting, right? Because if demons knew all mathematical truths, then we could, you could actually take advantage of this as a mathematician, right? Because all you'd have to do is get yourself possessed. But maybe the problem is that the demon's going to toy with you, and he's going to like, he'll, who is it that wrote like they wrote this? Oh, I can't remember. There's a mathematician who famously, like 400 years ago, they wrote this theorem in their notebook, and then in the margins they said something like that they had a proof, but they didn't write down what the proof was. I forget who that was, but maybe that's what the demon does. They're like write down while they're possessing you. They write down like suggestive directions of a proof, but they don't actually finish the proof. And so when you get unpossessed, you're looking back through your notes and you're like, oh no, I had it, but I can't publish it because it's incomplete. And you know, that's how they get you. I'm not really sure how that follows God's plan, but it seems like the sort of thing a demon would do, but I don't really know. Anyway, if the demon actually knows all mathematical truths, it would seem like that you could maybe use that to your advantage to get possessed and then take advantage of that knowledge. Like, I'm kind of being facetious here, but this whole thing sounds absolutely ridiculous. So if it's possible for free beings to gain that sort of knowledge, why didn't God just create everyone like humans with all of that knowledge to start with? Why make it difficult for us to have to go through this excruciatingly difficult and error-prone process of inferring things if you could just make people have that knowledge? I don't, like, you maybe say it undermines our freedom, but does it? Because apparently angels and demons still have freedom, so I'm not sure how that's supposed to work. Again, none of this actually makes sense. It's all just ad hoc nonsense.
This is the power of an angelic intellect. An angelic intellect has a perfect memory. Everything about perfect you memory. It just
sounds better to be an angel, like perfect knowledge, perfect memory, not having to infer things, not bound by space and time. Why aren't we just all angels? Like, why bother with this body? It seems strictly worse to have a body. All the things he's saying.
The angels witness anything that is observable, anything external. They know that. They know about you. They've spent your whole life studying you. So they have phenomenal information about you. And this is why they can exercise a temptation that's going to hit you right in between the eyes. Right? They're able to produce something that is maximally attractive to you based on your own makeup and your own composition. So all of this, angels function in this manner, demons function in this manner. When a demon is present in somebody, however, he has made himself subject at some level to the world of physicality. As long as he's present in this person X, my coming near person X and praying, he's going to feel it acutely, right? And this is the way.
But not physical. So why does he feel it at all? There's just no logic here. Like, demon is non-physical fundamentally, and they can somehow causally interact with a physical body, say, because somehow we've like abdicated our lawful possession of our own body, however that's supposed to work. But then why does that mean that the demon feels like, okay, so the demon might feel physically through our body. Like, if you kicked us, the demon might feel that. I could kind of vaguely see that, although I still don't really think that makes sense. But because how would the demon understand sight? Like, demons don't see, they don't have eyes. So how would they interpret the series of neural inputs that are coming to our brain, through our eyeballs? Like, how would they make any sense of that? And they don't need to anyway, because they just intuit things. As you said, they don't like infer. So what does it even mean for them to possess our body? They can't receive our sensory inputs because they don't have the apparatus to make sense of that, or the need to. So I don't know how they'd actually be able to feel our pain, but let's just sort of suppose hypothetically they somehow could. That doesn't answer the question as to why it is that the actual sounds of the prayer is what is oppressive to them, or what they can't endure, instead of it being it should be like the spiritual connection to God or something that is what is difficult for them. It shouldn't be about the vibrations in the air. Why would they care about that? That just makes no sense at all. Again, it's like we're going back to that model of the presence of God being like an actual liquid that spills over into a room when the priest comes in and says the prayer or whatever. And then when enough of it fills up, then the demon is forced out or runs away because he's scared of the water or something. That's the only way this actually makes any sense, if you think of it in that way. But then when you realize that the demon isn't physical and can't be affected by physical things, at least not fundamentally, right? Maybe they can feel our body being affected by those physical things, but they can't actually be affected by them. And furthermore, they certainly wouldn't be affected by vibrations in the air, which we interpret. I mean, the demon doesn't even hear. It doesn't have ears. So why does it care about certain patterns of vibration in the air, which to us we interpret as sounds, which then we have meaning and associations of language and so forth? But the demon doesn't have any of those things. So how is it affected by that? And why is it affected by the locality of those vibrations here, just because the priest is there? It should be about the presence of God in a spiritual sense. The best you can say is that these words invite the presence of God in a spiritual sense, but isn't God always present everywhere in some vague spiritual sense? And anyway, doesn't this take away the agency of the person who invited the evil spirit in the first place if someone else comes in and then invites God back in? But that other person wanted the evil spirit in. So then how come that's being overwritten with inviting God back in? None of it makes any sense.
In which God has so structured reality that in choosing to inhabit this person, he is choosing to accept the limitations on his own being. He's giving up his defenses in order to gain that person.
They see all, they know all. They know you better than know yourself. Yeah, it actually does give the vibe of a sort of a divine totalitarian police state. I think that's an interesting angle to see this through. But again, this is worse than any police state, because at least in any totalitarian state, you could rely on your own mind, right? They couldn't actually take you out of your own body and like puppet you. Like a demon can. So it's worse than that. Demon's more or less smart compared to ChatGPT. Good question. So this guy flicked some water on a guy's shoulder when there is no way the guy would know it, and the guy freaked out. There's so much evidence I became a Christian. Yeah, pretty much. It's hard to understand how actually anyone takes that seriously. Those sort of stories seriously.
And so what comes near the person that is holy, he's going to feel it acutely, right? So knowing this, an exorcist tries to do that very thing. So initially in an interview, I will pray with the individual and I'll observe reactions. I'm looking for reactions. They don't mean anything other than the person reported a reaction or I physically saw a reaction. They don't mean anything more than that. It doesn't mean to me, the conclusion cannot be made at this point that it was the devil or that it was mental illness per se or some other cause. I move into then testing in a manner that the person doesn't know, because there are three classical signs of demonic possession. Knowledge of unknown languages. So languages a person has never been taught. And so I don't mean...
How do you know if someone's never been taught or never been exposed to a language? And you would also have to know that language in order to verify that it was correct and not just gibberish. And then how can you establish that that person has never been exposed to that language? That is... I just have no idea how you could use that as a sign. That seems very problematic.
I mean, one or two words or a few phrases. I mean, perfect knowledge of that language that they...
But unless you have perfect knowledge of that language, how would you be able to distinguish it? Okay, maybe you don't need perfect, but you need to be pretty fluent in a language to be able to tell whether this person is fluent in a language or they've just learned a few phrases, right? Or whether their pronunciation and grammar is correct. So I don't know how, as a priest, you'd be able to establish that, especially if the languages in question, like rare or ancient languages. That seems really difficult. And then, of course, there's the question about how do you know what exposure the person has had any time in their life, including things that they may have forgotten, that they've seen on TV, or that they learned at school, or that a relative spoke. Like, how do you rule all of these out? That seems like it would be very difficult. I guess there are cases when you could do that, like if someone lived all their life in an isolated village or something, and then they spoke, like, I don't know, ancient Egyptian, which is not taught anywhere, in that region, and no one could. There's no plausible way that they could have had access to it. Yeah, there are cases you can imagine, and I'd like to see if there are documented cases like that. But in general, anyone growing up in especially these days, cosmopolitan urban environments, there's no way you can know what languages they've been exposed to.
They can function and speak in it using perfect grammar, perfect sentences.
How do you know that they have perfect
respond
grammar? Do you speak the language?
In other words, formulate a thought based on that knowledge, based on a knowledge that is theirs. Secondly, is knowledge of hidden and distant events, things that they couldn't possibly know. Like, for example,
Well, yeah, knowledge of hidden and distant events would be evidence, at least, of something supernormal going on, I would say, if that could be established. But it's all going to depend on the case. How do you know? Again, how do you establish that they wouldn't be able to know that through other means? That's quite difficult to do.
What is written word for word on the shopping list in your pocket, an extensive shopping list. Knowledge, if they're...
That's easy to test, right? I mean, shopping list is not a very good thing to test, because shopping lists are easy to guess. I would guess a good cold reader could probably guess, pretty accurately what's on a person's shopping list, because they'd probably be able to extract some information surreptitiously that's relevant to making guesses about what sort of things that person is likely to buy and so forth, and make some pretty good guesses. So I think that's too easy to guess. A better thing would simply be to generate a random number and put it somewhere where the person can't possibly see it. Make sure you control that all carefully, and then get them to tell you the number. That is a very good test, because if properly controlled, there's really no way the person could possibly know what's on the number. You can't cold read a random number out of someone. And that test could be done. I'd be very eager to see. It's super easy to do. So yeah, let's hear the evidence about possessed people guessing random numbers that have been prevented, that they haven't been exposed to.
Are able to report back to you something you did at a certain time and place in your life, and no one was around to witness it. You've never told anyone else, but they have that knowledge. Well, they have knowledge of the occult, knowledge of what is hidden, right? That it surpasses the power of human nature to know that. And thirdly,
yeah, I mean, that one would also seem like plausible evidence. The one problem there is that you are relying on your own memory of what happened, and whether you've told anyone else or revealed it in some way that you're not aware of. Classic example is in a movie, right, where there's like the undercover bad guy, and they're talking to the protagonist, and that they slip up and they say something that they shouldn't know, and then the protagonist is right, and the protagonist is like, "How did you know that?" And then the person scrambles like, "Oh, so and so told me," and then the protagonist is like, but I didn't tell them that you shouldn't know that, and you kind of, I figured it out. You know something you shouldn't know, and so that you mustn't be who you say you are, or something like that. The problem with things like that is that you can make a mistake and forget that you've told someone something, or that you've revealed it in some indirect way. So you have to be pretty confident that that's something, or that it's something they could have guessed, right? If it's a high probability event, that's also a possibility. So the random number is much better, because there's no real way to guess that if it's long enough, and very easy to just generate a number and prevent them from seeing it. Can't really cold read that. So it's by far and away the better test. Also note that he hasn't actually said that he has encountered people who've been able to do that. He's just sort of said that's a classic test of demonic possession. And funnily enough, the guy that we Lambert, he didn't mention any of these things. He didn't mention occult knowledge or speaking in languages. He talked about much less impressive things, like people's eyes turning green, or people's foaming at the mouth and speaking in gruff voices and things like that, or slithering on the floor like a snake. That's much less impressive, because people can just do those things without needing supernormal powers. These sorts of things that Carlos is mentioning here, much better, although I think that, as I've said, that we need to introduce additional controls to avoid confounds. But yes, those would be more impressive. But he hasn't actually given any examples of these happening. He's just saying that these are the classic signs.
It is a display of superhuman strength, a power
Superhuman strength
that is
is the last
simply
one.
beyond the capability.
That's a problematic one because, well, there's a, there's a gradation, right? If someone is unaidedly lifting up, I don't know, a tank, like a 60-ton main battle tank. Yeah, obviously a human can't do that. That's impossible. But there may be feats that you would not expect someone to be able to do, but they still can do, right? So you got to make sure that it really is superhuman strength and not just unexpected strength.
Of a human person, a 120-pound woman cannot pick up and throw across the room a 300-pound man. Like that just doesn't happen. But if it does happen, now you have a display of.
So that's an interesting one, right? I don't know too much about these sorts of things. So what was it? 120-pound woman cannot pick up and throw across the room a 300-pound man. So to me, all of the work there is going into what is meant by pick up and throw across the room, because I absolutely believe that you could, with the right setup, you could give the appearance of the woman picking up and throwing the man, depending on the grip that she takes, the positioning, and in particularly how much the man is sort of playing along with the situation or accommodating. I mean, they do this in movies, right? With when they have the stuntmen come in and everything's choreographed, and so that when they move into a certain position, then they fly off this way or whatever, and then the camera is positioned at a certain angle. So I'm no expert at these sorts of things, but I believe you could make a display where that looked like it happened. That's why you've got to rule out these sort of controls. So don't make it something where anyone else is involved, because you never know what the other person is contributing there. Just make it where it's one person interacting with an inanimate object and lifting it in a very clear and unambiguous way, and where you can measure clearly what the actual say weight of the object is, and so there's no sort of ambiguity. Oh, it looked heavy, but maybe it actually wasn't, right? So again, this is just basic skepticism. Like, you just got to rule out the confounds or the possible avenues of error, and something that can seem impressive. I mean, this is what magicians do. They do things that look impressive, but are actually often just cheap tricks and misdirection. You got to make sure that that all of those possibilities, as far as you can, are ruled out. And so, feats of impressive strength, I believe that there are things that you can do that look like feats of impressive strength that are actually not, that they're tricks, misdirection, sort of illusions of perspective, or people sort of playing along and being accommodating to the person who's ostensibly giving the performance. So that one I think is less convincing. I think the best evidence would be like occult knowledge of things that you shouldn't know, and the best way to test that is just random number generator. That's very easy to test. In fact, this sort of thing has been tested, right, with parapsychology. They not necessarily numbers, but I think they use images and other things like that, and they get people to guess, and some of the highly powered studies have found that people can score like 50.01%, which is higher than 50% chance, and so they get these. They repeat it many times and get these super low p values. Anyway, so those sort of tests are done in other contexts, but this would be a very easy way to test for demonic possession. 100% there are judo throws. Like, I don't know the specifics of these things, but I absolutely believe that you could orchestrate something like that. So again, you've got to make sure that it's the alleged feat of strength is done in a way where it rules out these sorts of confounds. And again, I suspect that when these sorts of things are reported, those things are not taken into consideration, and the story sort of acquires a life of its own and sounds actually a lot more impressive than it really was in the actual circumstance.
The supernatural that has been shown, and you can't. Nothing in the natural provides an explanation for that. So you've got to leave the natural and enter into the supernatural.
Well, I just gave a whole bunch of explanations, at least for various, like cold reading for knowledge that they shouldn't have, or you accidentally slipping up and revealing something, lucky guessing, and I just talked a whole bunch about the possibilities of demonstrations of strength. So this is all generalities, right? It's hard to say what happened in a given situation without a lot of information. But a lot of this whole, there's no natural explanation really just comes down to lack of imagination and not thinking through things critically. Because if you talk to like professional skeptics, if you talk to scientists, if you talk to magicians, they can nearly always come up with clever ways of producing these effects or something that looks like these effects that don't actually require a supernatural cause. And it's really just because people like Carlos, I mean, I don't mean to be rude to him personally, but they're just lazy. Like, they don't actually go to the effort to test these beliefs and implement the controls that would be necessary to rule out these possibilities. They don't actually get a magician and a skeptic, relevant scientist, or a relevant expert in to help them to see whether or not there's anything that can't be explained naturalistically. They just kind of decide on their own intuition without exercising very much skeptical thought or research into the matter that, oh, it couldn't be. And, you know, that's just a self-serving belief, obviously, because that they get, if nothing else, they get a sense of meaning and purpose and status from doing this sort of stuff, if nothing else, right? And so obviously it's something that is important to them. And so it's inconvenient if it turned out to all be nonsense. Yes, I mean, this is the basic point, right? Considering how many movies there are which include special effects during exorcisms, you'd think Catholics would understand it's impossible to make a fake thing look real. Yes, exactly.
Natural to give the explanation. When I pray subsequently, I'm looking for these three things. Now, because somebody comes up to an exorcist asking for help, I think I have the devil. I think the devil is after me. Can you help me get rid of him? So you can't, just as you can't accept that as fact that what they're saying is true, neither the fact that they have the devil or necessarily that they even want to get rid of him. Right? You can't presume either one of those merely because somebody tells you. You have to now apply a testing that is beyond the human subject's perception. You have to be testing them without they know that they're being tested.
That's a good idea. Good thing to do.
One of the common tests that I've employed in the past, and I'm thinking about one case, the next podcast that I have coming out in my series.
Apparently he has a podcast series. No, that could be interesting listening.
Exorcist Files. It involves this case. It was a possessed firefighter. And so what I did, when I interviewed him in my office, I had a glass of water, just like this, like I'm drinking out of now, and I put it on.
We got to see that one again.
When I interviewed him in my office, I had a glass of water, just like this, like I'm drinking out of now, and I put it on top of a shelf.
Sorry, I don't know why I find that so funny. I just love the idea that he's been talking to us about all of this absolutely arcane nonsense about demons and how they work and how they interact with people and how you can test them. And then the one thing that he feels like that he just has to give us a concrete demonstration of is what a glass of water looks like. As if like, oh, I don't know, this glass of water thing. Like, I need to see that to believe that I know what that is, or like that you actually have. It's like, okay, well, thank you for that.
On one of my bookcases, one of the many bookcases that line my office. You know, it simply looked like a simple glass of water that was left on a shelf, but it was holy water. The human person didn't know that. I knew that. When he came in, he sat down and I just created simple conversation with him. And then, you know, I asked him a question that necessitated a story to be told, so that he was going to be talking for a while. And as I did that, I said, no, keep talking. And I just went to my shelves and I started putting down stacks of books. And those books ranged on various topics, the spiritual topics, religious topics, theology, and so forth. But just strange.
Various topics, and it's just all the same thing, pretty much. No biology textbooks or philosophy happen to be in there. No, just all nonsense. Okay.
And out of place things. For example, the 2002 Baltimore
Good
Orioles.
Good point. It could be any clear liquid that's in the glass. We don't know that it's water. Thank you, Ben. This is why it always pays to get multiple opinions, because, you know, we all have our skeptical blind spots. You can't assume that is water. We only know that it's a clear liquid. Maybe the evil spirits are deceptive, yeah. Maybe the evil spirits are being deceptive about the evil spirits that are in the glass, as in like those kind of spirits. There could be both, right? You know, it's not mutually exclusive. There's many things that you have to consider here.
A book on how to drywall your basement and so forth. Interspersed with these other titles.
Okay.
Why am I doing that? As I'm putting these down on the table in front of him, I'm controlling his eyes. And so he's looking at those titles. And I know that he's wondering, what in heaven's name is this priest doing? Why is he putting these books on the table? I'm controlling where he's looking. And so I just keep bringing several stacks, in the course of which I go to this glass on one of the shelves. Right? I know he can't see me. I have my back turned to him, but I know he has his back turned to me as well. And he's looking at what I just...
Huh? I thought you said you were controlling his... I thought Carlos says he's controlling the guy's eyes, but now he says that the guy, he's not looking at the... So how does he know what the person's looking at? I'm a bit confused here, but never mind.
Just put down on the table, and I take my finger. And
this is the flicking.
The tiniest drop of water on my finger. And as I'm walking with the next stack towards the table, I fling it on his back. I don't fling it on his skin. I fling it on his clothing. So there's no human way that this individual can perceive what has just happened. And this particular individual shot up immediately in the air backwards, hissing like a cat. And I didn't have the individual any longer. Now it's the demon speaking. So what I did in that moment is I established knowledge of the occult, knowledge of the hidden. There is no way on a human level that he could know I just put holy water on him.
All right, let's just, there's only 30 seconds left. Let's just play this out and we'll talk
No
about
way.
it. No way.
And there'll be
no
other
way.
tests of this
Okay.
sort as well. I don't
Sure,
really
no
like
way.
to go into those tests because those are those are the tools in our toolbox and sort of become public. They cease being effective as tools. So, but that gives you an
He can't tell you the real ways, the true deep law. Oh dear.
example of the kind of testing that we will do.
Have you ever had personal experience with someone knowing these ancient language or other languages, being fluent in
Good
them?
question.
I have.
Oh, just oops, didn't mean to click that.
One of the common
that's something else. Yeah, well, maybe I'll try to find the main video that's from. Oh, this is demonic possession right here. Look at this freeze frame. Anyway, yeah, checkmate atheist. Yeah, I think I remember hearing something about the flicking water thing, but I don't actually think I'd heard him describe it. Okay, so this is interesting. Okay, first of all, why do demons care about water that's been blessed? Like that makes absolutely no sense why they would be affected by the presence of. But hang on. The demon is supposed to know everything, right? The demon's supposed to be there. The demons possess the guy, whatever that means, you know. The demon knows everything. He doesn't need to perceive things. So the demon presumably already knows that the holy water's there. So why isn't it reacting immediately? If for some reason, again, unclear why, the physical location of the holy water matters. I don't know why that should be. It should be a spiritual thing, not a physical thing. But shouldn't the spirit already know that the holy water is there? I'm not even going to try to understand that. But putting that aside, if you wanted to test whether knowledge of like contact with holy water was precipitated a reaction from the demon, the obvious way you do that, like just the most just childishly, stupidly obvious way to do that is you just do a test. Like you do one version with regular water unblessed and the other version with holy water, and you see the difference, right? Like you use a control. This is what scientists do. But he doesn't use a control. He just does it one way with holy water, right? So the advantage here is that any reaction that you get can be attributed to the holy water. But the problem is that you haven't just done the holy water. You haven't just introduced holy water. What have you actually done? Well, there's this bizarre charade with the books that probably just weirds the person out. Like, I think it would kind of weird a lot of people out. Like, why are you putting all these books here? Like, it wouldn't necessarily creep you, but it just have you a bit uncomfortable. Like, you'd be expecting something to happen. I'd be like, what are you doing? Like, what's happening here? I'm like, am I supposed to do something? Like, what? So there's a sort of an expectation there that like there's something, I don't know, that I'm missing or something. You're feeling a bit uncomfortable. You're feeling a bit uncertain. And then I don't know why he said that the guy had his back to Carlos here. I'm not sure, because he before that said he was controlling his eyes. I feel like I don't fully understand the dynamics of the situation here, because why does the guy have his back to him if you were supposed to be talking to each other? That's not a natural situation to be like facing away from each other. I don't quite understand that. But anyway, so somehow they're facing away from each other, and then suddenly, apparently, Carlos says that he like turned around and like made this flicking motion. And then a bit of water hit the person's back. So I don't think I'm very good at noticing when a small bit of water hits my back, you know, even if it hits the clothes. But I believe that some people could probably tell if that happened, even if maybe they consciously didn't realize what they felt. They just sort of felt something, and that would startle them, right? But the thing is, I think it's more likely either that the guy saw, because our peripheral vision is very well attuned to rapid motion. So he could have actually seen Carlos out of the corner of his eye if they weren't facing directly away from each other, or he could have seen his reflection reflected in a mirror or a window or even a metallic object. Like, it doesn't have to be, he doesn't even have to realize that he saw it. All it has to be is some sign of motion, some rapid change in some shadow or reflection or something like that, right? He could have seen something and been startled. Another thing, which I think is possibly the most likely, is he heard something. He heard a sudden noise in a quiet room. And I actually have a very strong startle reflex. Like when I'm in a train station, and if for some reason the train like hoots its horn and I'm not expecting it, I will actually jump, like physically jump. It's kind of embarrassing. I don't know why. It's not a voluntary thing. It just happens as a kind of a reflex thing. So I absolutely believe that if you put me in a situation like that and I was kind of weirded out, and then I heard this sort of sound behind me, like I don't really know what it is, I could actually visibly jump and maybe exclaim, right? Which seems to be almost exactly what he described as startle response. So that could be in response to feeling the water hit his back, or seeing some motion out of the corner of his eye, or a reflection or a shadow or something, or hearing the sound of Carlos like swirl and flick the thing. Any of those things could have stimulated that response in that person. So to say that there's no natural way that this could have happened is utterly ludicrous. The way that you test this is to do it in a very subtle way, and I would say what he described is not subtle. it's sort of bizarrely theatrical. You just do it in a subtle way, introduce water into the situation, or like just dampen your hands and shake hands with them or something. I don't know, figure something out. And then you do it two ways, one with the holy water and one without the holy water, and see if there's any difference. This isn't rocket science. Like, that's not that hard. But somehow he convinces himself that this ridiculously overly theatrical test, which has obvious confounds and has no control, is like ironclad proof that the person is possessed, instead of perhaps was what I would say this person has a normal startle response from the guy being weird, like randomly flicking water across the room. Like, what the hell? Who does that? So I just like, is that supposed to be convincing? Is that seriously supposed to be convincing? That is embarrassing. No wonder the resurrection. No wonder people believed in the resurrection in the first century. If people in modern society, like literate, educated people, can believe in demons for evidence as flimsy as this, of course uneducated people could believe that Jesus resurrected in the first century, especially when they, their livelihoods depended on it, because that's all they had, is their community and that sense of belonging. They had nothing else in life. It's just, it's telling, but telling in a way that I think that is not very favorable to the apologist's case. Bizarrely theatrical is a good way to put it. Yeah. Well, that's also a good point. The test should be double blinded, so the friar's behavior may be important to triggering the response, which is what I was saying. So ideally, they shouldn't themselves know whether the water is blessed. There's various degrees you could take of this, but apparently. I'm just thinking that it actually reminds me of what we see sometimes in, I think, certain of the more recent adaptations of Sherlock Holmes do a very poor job of showing. If you actually read the books, I mean, he doesn't always get it right, but in the books, Sherlock Holmes is very methodical and he's very observant. He notices lots of small clues and then he thinks through them and puts them together into a story. Now, he does take leaps of logic at times and is not always fully justified in his conclusions and sometimes does get it wrong. But you can see the reasoning process and you can see how he gathers evidence and things like that. But in some of the more modern adaptations on film or on TV, what I've seen is that the way they portray it isn't careful observation and deduction. It's wild extrapolation and a string of lucky guesses. And the point is that it seems like the people writing the show don't know or don't care what reasoning and investigation actually looks like. And they just make a big show of it, but not actually understand how the logic of it works. And that's the feeling that I get here. It's like there's some vague appreciation of, I should be doing a test, but he doesn't actually understand how anything about like the scientific method works, or even like good detective methods or medical investigation or anything like that, medical diagnosis. Instead, it's like the Hollywoodized version where it's this sort of stupidly and unnecessarily theatrical performance, which doesn't have any of the validity of a good scientific test or, good inference in any other fields. And it's just about the showmanship. It's just, and he says he has other techniques and tools as well. I wonder what those are. Like, it'd be very interesting to find out. I think he or someone else has told a story that they test people with regular water too. Yeah, I mean, I assume that they at least sometimes would. Of course, the problem is if you do it, twice, then there's a 50% chance of, if it's yes or no, there's a 50% chance of success. So you have to control for that as well. And it maybe gets a bit complicated, but that's the point. Like, these things actually can be difficult in real life. But at the very least, you should have a control. Like, at the very least, you should try it with both types of water. Wish Dillahunty became a paranormal investigator is a perfect new James Randi. Yeah, I mean, there's a certain type of disposition that makes someone very good at this, but also someone who has knowledge of the tricks of and the tools of trade of being a magician. I think that's a very, very useful skill as well, because they understand human psychology, often in intuitive ways, and like misdirection and these sorts of things, which are very common in paranormal and sort of pseudoscientific pursuits. So I think that that's one of the skills that James Randi had. Anyway, I want to get to bed, but I did want to finish on this one here, why exorcisms can't be recorded, because this is, of course, an important question. I hope it's not just like, oh, privacy, because I'm sure you can find someone who's willing to, like, they can record operations sometimes. Or even just tape record, like, you can censor it so that the person's identity isn't visible. Like, there's ways you could do this, and surely someone somewhere could do this. So it better not just be a privacy issue.
My question is, why don't we have more videotaped evidence of demonic possession? I know there's a privacy concern, but it seems that could be addressed with the subject's permission to be recorded, as was presumably the case when Father Amorth exorcism was videotaped.
Yeah, there is some debate on whether or not that exorcism by Father Amorth was actually given permission or not. I mean, I've seen video of that, and the quality is not very good. I will say that, at least from a Catholic perspective, the reason the church does not permit them to be recorded is to protect the identity of the person. What the person does afterwards is certainly up to them. It's the same way like the sacrament of confession or somebody confessing their sins. That's not something that's made public, but it's to protect the identity of the person. And even in today's world of technology, and people would say, well, that's rather convenient then, because if we have these videotaped evidence, it would bring clarity. But it is also true that people can manipulate videotapes and whatnot to fit whatever agenda they might have. But ultimately, it just comes
evidence can be faked, so let's just forget about it and not bother. Yeah, that's a really good response to that.
Down to, at least in my perspective, a question of faith. Does one really believe in the reality of evil spirits or not? And then if you're a person of faith, then believing is seeing. If you're more of a scientific mind, you might say, well, seeing is believing. But I think even if there were videotapes, I think there would still.
But hasn't he said before that he's a skeptic? But now he's saying if you're a person of faith, believing is seeing. So that seems to directly contradict what he said before about being a skeptic. I mean, I understand that people's worldviews are going to affect how you assess evidence and interpret your experiences. That's fair enough, but you can still try to be skeptical and try to exercise those, tools and methods and faculties to try to mitigate your own biases and preconceptions and things. But he seems to be pretty explicitly saying here that, nah, I don't care about that. I just believe because I see it because I believe it, which I think is, I think that's a fair representation of what he just said. And if so, that explicitly contradicts what he said about being a skeptic. If that's your attitude, I don't see how you can be actually skeptical about this sort of thing. I like how he's just called live call. I like that. They don't actually put his name in there.
There'll be people that would doubt their credibility.
I mean, I think it would. There'd be like, no matter what video evidence you have, there'd be some hardcore skeptics that would, just disbelieve.
You always hear about hardcore skeptics. I'm not quite sure what this means exactly. I feel like that I'm probably one of those, though. I don't self-identify as hardcore, but well, not hardcore skeptic, maybe hardcore something else.
No matter what evidence they come across. But I think for some people, like me, for example, if it would increase my confidence that demonic possession is like real nowadays. Me, I'm kind of like, I'm a quasi skeptic. I don't firmly believe it or firmly disbelieve it either way. But thanks for your answer.
Yeah, I would say that there may be other faith traditions that may permit that, but at least from a Catholic perspective, that's not something that's permitted. But there may be someone of another Christian faith tradition that would do that. The church always wants to protect and safeguard the identity of the person so that they don't really become some type of a spectacle. And, that you look at the movie The Exorcist, that was based on a 1949 case of exorcism of a young boy from Mount Rainier, Maryland. And the exorcism was actually performed in St. Louis, Missouri. That man who was possessed, throughout his life, he could have made millions of dollars. There was a lot of people that went to him and wanted to hear his story and whatnot. And he always would decline any of that. He just said that that's a part of my life that he never wanted to talk about again. He believed that once the demons were cast out, he didn't want to try to continue to address it or make a spectacle of himself or anything like that. So again, the church always wants to protect and safeguard. The church is very clear on what's permitted and what's not permitted. And I would suggest that being disobedient to the authority of the church and then trying to fight the devil is a pretty bad combination, because the devil himself was disobedient to God. He would thrive on that. And I don't think that disobedience would be a way to address the devil and to attack him, if you will.
No, I don't actually know what he's talking about at the moment. But in regards to the answer, the privacy response is entirely inadequate. So in science, we often have, well, and in the law and medicine as well, we often have instances where it's necessary to collect intimate data or details about a person, which shouldn't be made public. But we also want to be able to use that information for scientific purposes or medical purposes or legal purposes. So, shockingly, there are ways around this. I mean, and this was mentioned in the question, but just sort of brushed aside. Like you can just excuse me, there are ways to protect the identity of the person. You could actually implement a manipulation, like covering parts of their head or something in the actual recording itself, or putting a cloth in a strategic location, or you could edit the footage afterwards and only release censored versions. You could even just do a sound recording. That might be sufficient for certain purposes. There's all sorts of things you could come up with if you were actually interested in doing this that would preserve the anonymity of the person, in addition, of course, to having permission. So I really don't see that that is a fundamental barrier there. Now, of course, the real answer to this question is that the church has absolutely nothing to gain in video recording exorcisms. What purpose would that serve for them? If the recordings came out and we saw how embarrassingly silly it all was and how it was a whole lot of nothing, and very obviously it was just sort of human performativity and people taking advantage of people with mental illnesses or just who have superstitious beliefs or whatever else, that would be an embarrassing public relations problem for the church, and so they wouldn't want to have to deal with that. On the other hand, suppose that the videos did contain what we might regard as sort of plausible evidence of something, or it's like suggestive evidence at least. We all know that's not actually going to, like, it might convince some people who are already religious to take exorcisms more seriously, but it's never going to, realistically, it's never going to be sufficient to really convince people. If anything, it would just invite more questions and more probing into the practice of exorcisms to seek, like, it looks like maybe there is something going on here, like what's happening, and like we want to probe and poke at it more, and the church doesn't want that. So kind of either way, it's bad news for the church. And also, I mean, I don't have firm evidence for this, but from what I've been able to gather, the higher ups in the Catholic Church are kind of embarrassed about all of this sort of exorcism stuff. They sort of let it happen because there's a demand for it, and they have to deal with it some way. And if they're not meeting that demand, then people are going to turn to someone else. And technically, yes, it is part of the doctrine, right? So it's like, all right, we'll sort of let this happen. But they don't like this stuff, and it's kind of embarrassing. So they just don't want to draw any attention to it, and so they keep it as hush hush as they can. That's the sense that I've gotten. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I think a lot of the higher ups in the Catholic Church don't actually really think much of this stuff, and they kind of just wish it would all go away. So that's sort of the real reason why there's no, at least in the Catholic tradition, I can't speak to other religious traditions, so it's probably similar. Any organization who has any sense is not going to want to draw attention to this sort of stuff, because it's just sort of going to be bad publicity however it comes out, right? Only crazy people would actually try to like record this stuff in a real context and put that footage out, because it's only going to cause problems for those people. And it might be a way to get attention if nobody knows about you, but then no one's going to take the footage seriously anyway, right? So they'll just say it's all an act, right? So I think that's the real reason we don't have this sort of footage. The only organizations that only certain organizations could release this footage and have anyone even take it slightly seriously, as opposed to just thinking it was like making a horror film, like the Catholic Church or other major religious traditions. They're the only people who could actually do this and have people take it seriously. But all of those organizations are far too sensible with their public relations to even think about doing that, because they'd realize that whatever the footage end up looking like, it would not look good for them. So there's no reason for them to do that. So that's the reason we don't actually see any exorcisms recorded. I actually think that's a much more reasonable explanation. I mean, yeah, privacy is a concern, but I think that that's not an overriding concern, because there's ways around that. Anyway, that is the last one. Well, there are other ones to do, but I think that is enough battling demons for the moment. A hardcore skeptic is a skeptic with a spiky mohawk hairstyle. I guess that makes sense. See, I've always been more of a metalhead than a hardcore fan, so maybe that explains why I'm not a hardcore skeptic. But anyway, that's enough for today. So hopefully we have stemmed the tide of demonic activity coming from the depths of hell, or wherever it comes from. I don't know. That's where it comes from in video games. Like, I don't know if that's actually where it comes from. I don't know if we've managed to save the West, or preserve the kingdom or whatever it is that we're supposed to do. But I did my best, and we spent a couple of hours here battling demons, and hopefully they'll go back to Cameron's channel and not bother us anymore from there. But I mean, seriously, it's very hard to actually take this stuff seriously. Like, I mean, I sort of do and sort of don't. I take it seriously in the sense that it seems like at least some people do take this seriously. And Cameron promoting it on his channel to the extent that he has, particularly in recent months, is, I think, how to put this? It is intellectually lazy, it is irresponsible, and it's embarrassing. He should feel embarrassed about this. Again, some people criticize my recent community posts saying that his channel has gotten worse. Sort videos by oldest and then by latest and tell me that there has not been a serious decline in the intellectual quality of what he is putting out there. Not saying it was previously great. There's a lot of problems with the more serious apologetics videos as well. But it was so much better in the early days of the channel in terms of like actual discussions between people with different viewpoints, serious questions, meaningfully like intellectual topics, instead of all of this sort of one side sensationalist, not having diverse views considered, and focusing on ridiculous topics like aliens, demons, and as well as the culture war stuff. And so I think that the channel has really gone downhill in the last couple of years. And it's a real shame, because I do think that there is a place in the public space for intellectual defense of Christianity. I think that's good. I think that robust and serious discussion is an important way that we can arrive at the truth and improve our ideas and challenge our preconceptions. And so, I want to see more of that. There used to be at least a spark of that on Cameron's channel, and maybe more than a spark back in the day. But these days, it really, like the demon stuff, not only is it detracting from that, but also I think in itself is harmful to be propagating those ideas, because there are a lot of scared and superstitious people around, not just Christians, but other religious traditions and non-religious people as well. And some proportion of them are vulnerable to these ideas. And I think that you should not be presenting them uncritically in the way that Cameron is doing. And it's a real shame. I think he's doing harm. He's undermining his own brand. If not in the short run, maybe he's obviously doing it because they get views, right? Maybe it's good for him in the short term. I suspect in the long term, it's going to come back to bite him, because he's really going to undermine his credibility. But maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe it will work out for him. We'll see. But I do think that he's doing harm, because some proportion of people who are vulnerable and susceptible to these sorts of ideas are going to become kind of more likely to take these seriously. They're going to perhaps act on these in situations they wouldn't have, and confirm beliefs that they already had, or cement them further in these sorts of things. So that's dangerous, and it's something that Cameron doesn't appear to care about. I mean, I'm sure if you asked him, he would say he would, right? But where's the evidence of that in his actual behavior? I don't see that. He doesn't seem to care about genuine dialogue and genuine discussion of serious apologetics and philosophical ideas, because where is that on his channel? Like, it's hardly there at all anymore. And he also doesn't seem to care about people's well-being, because how is he improving that through the sorts of ideas that he's promoting? It doesn't even seem to do it in a responsible way. Like, if you're going to talk about these things seriously, you might want to highlight the fact that a lot of people who come to believe that they're demonic possessed may have mental illness or be vulnerable in other ways, right? And you might be very cautious, like when you're talking about any sensitive topics, like you do it in a cautious way. But I don't see the evidence of that. It's all, he's sort of sitting there like, interesting, yeah, so have you seen evidence of this sort of demonic activity? Oh yeah, okay, but what about this? It's just all like sort of this dispassionate, but also entirely non-critical, passive engagement with the material. Anyway, so I mean, I'm trying to be forthright without being sort of blatantly rude, as rude as I might like to be. But the point, I guess the point I wanted to make is that it's because I think that genuine discussion of serious ideas is important, and that is the ostensive mission of Capturing Christianity. And he's, I think, very clearly moved away from that. And also, I think that promoting ideas about demonic possession and demons and related ideas is harmful and actually causes damage in society in various ways. It's for those reasons that I think it is important to respond to these sorts of things, in the small impact that I can have. I do think that that's the sense in which I take it seriously, because it has real effects. And I think that it is valuable to present some at least considered, the skeptical, naturalistic response to this sort of things, to actually highlight just how silly it is, how weak the evidence is, how poor the thinking is, because it's not as obvious to everyone, right? And I hope that I've illustrated some ways in which, the whole theory doesn't make any sense. It's not justified, like theologically. It's full of contradictions. None of it coheres together. And the evidence presented in favor is wholly inadequate and pretty easy to account for naturalistically. And that the entire methodology that these exorcists use is completely flawed and would be inadmissible in any other sort of intellectual context. So that's what I hope to illustrate. Anyway, so I guess, I mean, I don't want my channel to turn into like capturing demons. I know I've covered a fair bit of it lately, but partly that's because Cameron has covered so much of it. So I'm responding to what one of the leading Christian channels on YouTube, like Christian intellectual channels on YouTube, puts out. So I don't know that I can be fully to blame for that, but I will do other content as well. Like I'm going to work on some more edited videos. But I guess so long as I see these ideas being propagated in contexts like this, I'm going to keep responding to them. So, we've got to keep fighting the good fight against the demons. So anyway, thanks everyone. Yeah, he doesn't care about other people's well-being. That's standard for astrologers, Christians, and other woo-head snake oil hucksters. I don't think all Christians are like that, but I think that we're seeing that from Cameron here, and that is what I think is is upsetting and disconcerting, because I as cynical as I am, I do kind of like to believe that people are generally well-intentioned, at least to some extent, right? But it's hard to come up with a plausible explanation as to why Cameron would be presenting so much demon content in the way that he is doing it, especially when you contrast it with the ostensive aims of the channel and the previous content on the channel, and combine that with other things that he's done and getting donations and focus on that and bemoaning people not watching certain videos. Like when you put it all together, I think there's a very obvious explanation for this behavior. Anyway, so, but yeah, as long as it continues on that channel, and as long as people keep watching it, then I'm going to, like, people keep watching Cameron's videos, I'm going to keep responding to them. Just a quick check of chat here. Yeah, I think that'll do. Thanks. Capturing griftianity. Yeah, thanks everyone. Take care of yourselves. Be sure to avoid any demonic possession activity, because you never know when you could have little flicks of holy water coming at you. So always be on the lookout. Thanks everyone. Take care. Talk to you next time.